Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the What If guy, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Issei had ultimate class power. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Underworld, Vassago Castle, Lucien Vassago's bedchamber. Lucien murmured that he had to wake up as he rose for the day. He sat up and took in his surroundings. The walls had a silvery sheen and several portraits lined the room, which blended Regency-era decor with modern conveniences. A massive television to the right of the door, 3 walk-in closets, and a top-of-the-line computer on a table beside the bed. A door led to his private bathroom, where marble tile met dual sinks, a glass shower, a golden bathtub, and a silver toilet. A large television had been installed in front of the toilet at Lucien's request. He stretched on the edge of the bed and stepped out onto the balcony to gaze over the family garden. He searched for the item that started his mornings but found it missing. A knock sounded at the door. Lucien gave permission for the maid to enter. Chelsea the maid bowed and apologized for bringing his daily paper late as she presented the newspaper to him. Lucien accepted the paper and dismissed the delay, telling Chelsea to prepare the shower for him. She acknowledged him and left to make arrangements. Lucien scanned the headline and smirked at the headline announcing that Leviathan had been defeated by the heir of the Vassago clan. He reflected on the duel, which had been a one-sided affair in his favor, and set the paper aside after flipping through it. He mocked the idea that Serafal had seriously thought she could challenge him, imitating her voice as he teased that she had challenged him to a duel and that Sotan would never marry him if Serafal won. Flashback Underworld, Satan's palace in the capital of Lilith. During the duel, Serafal laughed and tried to steady herself after Lucien neutralized her attacks. She had faltered under his gravity distortion. Lucien taunted her, suggesting that a Satan should be able to mount a stronger challenge and insisting that Sotan would be his if she did not get serious. Serafal declared her anger and released a tremendous surge of aura. Lucien dismissed her new effort as ineffective. Serafal unleashed an ice attack that transformed the area into solid ice, but Lucien remained unaffected. He reversed gravity around himself and floated away from the ground, then shifted the field to suspend Serafal in midair. With controlled precision, he used a gravity technique to immobilize her, squeezing the space around her until she was overwhelmed and rendered unconscious. He released her and allowed her to fall to the ground. The remaining Satans watched in stunned silence, having recognized Lucien's immense power and dominance in the duel. Serzex recovered from his shock and confirmed Lucien as the victor. Lucien expressed regret that it had come to that while offering a hope for forgiveness toward Serafal. Others present speculated about Lucien's potential, with Serzex admitting uncertainty and Ajuka grinning at the expected prowess of his cousin. Lucien summoned a portal to return the unconscious Serafal to Vassago territory. In flashback, Lucien found the memory amusing as Chelsea reappeared and informed him that his shower was ready. He finished quickly and dressed. Chelsea had made his bed and chosen an outfit for the day: a black dress shirt with a white waistcoat and matching ascot, white dress pants, black silk socks, and black alligator dress shoes. Chelsea offered to help him dress, and Lucien, slightly annoyed but accustomed to the routine, accepted. She helped him into the outfit with practiced efficiency. Once dressed, Lucien thanked her and the exchange left Chelsea blushing as she bowed. They walked toward the dining room where the family gathered. Chelsea walked slightly ahead with her hands folded at her front. Lucien attempted small talk, asking Chelsea if she had seen a recent poll the Underworld had conducted about the most eligible bachelors. Chelsea replied that she had not seen it, and Lucien proudly informed her that he had taken first place again, asserting that anyone who saw him could not resist his beauty and elegance. Chelsea, still blushing, agreed. Lucien added that his fiancée and her peerage were arriving that day, and Chelsea reacted with surprise. Lucien felt a sudden sense of unease and muttered that this was not how things were supposed to end. Chelsea thought that the prince was supposed to marry the commoner servant and live happily ever after as they reached the dining room. Lucien called her name as Chelsea opened the door for him, and Chelsea answered him respectfully. Lucien smirked, read Chelsea's thoughts, and told her that such endings belonged to fairy tales and romance novels, but that she would eventually find someone who loved her for who she was. He entered the dining room, leaving a flushed Chelsea behind him. Lucien bowed to his parents and greeted them. Lord Vassago rose and returned the greeting, and Lady Vassago did the same. Lord Vassago felt pride at his son. The Vassago clan had lost much prestige under Lucien's grandfather, but Lucien might restore and elevate the family. Lord Vassago had arranged a marriage between Lucien and Sona Sitri with grand hopes. The morning paper had only increased his satisfaction. He had learned that Lucien had defeated Serafal Leviathan, one of the 4 great demons of the underworld, with ease. Lord Vassago wondered if his son possessed rare, powerful abilities and whether he might become a legendary figure. All of this made him a very pleased man. Lady Vassago shared her husband's joy. She hoped Lucien would rise to greatness, which would bring honor to their family. She also felt proud that her son was intelligent and respectful and believed she had done well as a mother. Lucien asked his parents for permission to begin eating, and both apologized for their distraction and sat. They ate mostly in silence until Lord Vassago broke it by asking about Lucien's plans for the day and whether he would meet the Sitri girl. Lucien confirmed that Sona would arrive later with her peerage and that his father had discussed a marriage contract with Lord Sitri. Lord Vassago explained that Lord Sitri was willing to agree, but that his daughter did not want the match. Lucien wondered what could be the reason, noting that he had already beaten her in chess twice. Lord Vassago murmured that women had complicated feelings, and Lady Vassago scolded him playfully by pulling his cheek, reminding him that complexity did not mean inscrutability. Lucien excused himself with a bow and left to train. Some time later, at Kuo Academy in the human world, Saji shouted in surprise when Sona announced that they would travel to the underworld to meet Lucien Vassago about the arranged marriage. Saji demanded why Lucien was chosen instead of him. Sona, as student council president, explained that her father had arranged the marriage because of Lucien's power. Though only a few years older, he displayed extraordinary abilities and had defeated her older sister with little apparent effort. The members of Sona's peerage reacted with wide eyes at the news. Saji clenched his teeth with jealousy and anger. He cared for Sona and had hoped to marry her, and the arrangement with such a powerful devil made him feel helpless. Momo, a bishop in the peerage, asked whether Sona truly wished to marry someone she barely knew. Sona answered that her parents will mattered and that Lucien had fulfilled her condition by beating her in chess. Saji worried that Lucien might be like Riser, but Sona found Lucien to be intelligent and well-mannered in their meeting. The decision was not open to debate. They would leave for the underworld in 2 hours, visit Sona's older sister to check on her condition, then go to meet Lucien. Later, in the underworld at Synod Hospital in Sitri territory, Serafal spoke to her younger sister with an affectionate tone. Sona asked how her older sister was feeling, clearly worried. Serafal was recovering from a harsh duel with Lucien and had suffered serious injuries that left her weakened and unable to move normally. Serafal apologized that she had not been able to protect Sona, and Sona reassured her that it was not her fault. Sona then indicated that they had to leave and called for her peerage to accompany her. Before they departed, Serafal asked to tell Sona something important and told her to be happy with a small, tired smile. Sona bowed and promised to try, and then the peerage activated a large magical circle and transported themselves from the hospital to the gates of Vassago Castle deep within Vassago territory. A guard called out and demanded to know who approached. Sona identified herself as Lady Sitri and explained that she and her peerage had come to meet Lucien Vassago. The guard apologized and allowed them entry, escorting them to the castle's front door. A maid named Kusa greeted them and introduced herself as a servant of the Vassago clan, offering to escort them to Lucien. The maid led them to Lucien's private lounge, where Lucien lay sleeping on a couch. Kusra bowed to the sleeping heir and then to Sona and her peerage as she excused herself. Sona attempted to wake Lucien, calling his name softly at first and then more insistently when there was no response. Frustrated by what he perceived as disrespect toward his master, Saji grew angry. When Lucien still did not respond, Saji shouted for him to wake up. Saji shouted that Lucien had the nerve to sleep in front of Kaicho and ignore her. Lucien woke and dismissed him, calling him a lowly pawn and saying he irritated his ears. Saji began to retort, but Sona intervened and bowed to apologize for her pawn's behavior. Lucien smirked and told them not to let that pawn step out of line. Saji ground his teeth in silence along with the rest of the peerage. A maid offered Sona tea, but she declined. Lucien mentioned seeing Sona's sister and apologized. Sona explained that her sister had been overprotective and had let her anger get the better of her. Lucien asked why Sona had come and she answered that she wanted another chess match with stakes. If she won, she would not be required to marry him. Lucien accepted lazily, confident the result would not change. They moved to a chessboard by the window with gold and silver pieces. Lucien corrected her about the colors and allowed Sona to pick first. He then proceeded to defeat her decisively, capturing every piece and even promoting 2 queens without losing a single piece himself. Lucien pointed out his victory with obvious arrogance. Sona rose from the board and they stood facing each other in tense silence. That was the final straw for Saji, who had long resented the idea of Sona marrying Lucien. He lost his temper and accused Lucien of mistreating Kaicho. Lucien answered angrily, questioning what gave Saji the right to tell him how to behave with his fiancée. Saji insisted that Kaicho did not deserve to be treated that way and said Lucien was unworthy of her. Lucien sneered and threatened to destroy him for his insolence. Without warning, Lucien used a technique he had been perfecting. He lifted Saji off the ground and manipulated the gravity around him, concentrating force around Saji's throat so that invisible pressure pinned him in place. Saji struggled and gasped, unable to breathe properly. Sona pleaded for Lucien to stop. He refused, calling the pawn an eyesore. When Sona knelt and begged with tears in her eyes, Lucien finally released his control. Saji fell to the floor gasping for air while members of Sona's peerage rushed to help him. Momo accused Lucien of being a monster, and Ruruko demanded how he could do such a thing. Lucien shrugged and said that Saji should have known his place. As Saji caught his breath, he activated his sacred gear, absorption line, and attempted to attach it to Lucien. Lucien reacted by suddenly shifting gravity with brutal acceleration towards Saji. The strain tore the connection. With the line and slammed Saji into the far wall. He was knocked unconscious. Lucien advanced on the fallen Saji and delivered harsh physical blows, warning Sona that if she or her peerage interfered he would kill them. Sona, kneeling and crying, proposed settling the matter with a rating game. If she won, she would not have to marry him. If he won, she would submit and allow him to determine Saji's fate. Lucien accepted, amused that she so clearly did not want to marry him, and gave them 2 weeks to train their peerage. As a final, cold gesture, Lucien struck the unconscious Saji once more while his fellow peerage carried him away, then ordered them to remove the boy from his sight and return to his couch. Sona and her peerage immediately used a teleportation circle to transport from Vassago Castle to Synod Hospital to get Saji medical attention. With the countdown to the decisive rating game fast approaching, they prepared to train and gather their strength. 13 days remained until the rating game. It was early morning in the underworld. Most devils would still be sleeping, and Lucien Vassago would likely have been among them, but this day was different. It was the first day of training for the rating game against the Sitri peerage. Lucien stood in a green tracksuit, waiting for the rest of his peerage to dress for the hard day ahead. His queen, the princess of the Fire Nation Azula, wore a red tracksuit and a red headband bearing the Fire Nation insignia. The other members of the peerage gradually strolled out of the mansion onto the training grounds in their usual gear, still groggy from the early hour. Lucien would not tolerate complaints. Lucien announced through his blowhorn that there were 13 days until the rating game and that training would be intensified. His peerage responded in unison and prepared themselves. Lucien praised their spirit, pointed to a nearby mountain over 2,000 feet tall, and ordered a morning hike. Everyone ran to the mountain's base, carrying packs that would have weighed hundreds of pounds under normal gravity. Lucien informed them that he would distort the gravity to 10 times normal to provide an added challenge. The peerage accepted without complaint. They had grown accustomed to Lucien's demanding regimen. The increased gravity was merely another obstacle. The training had made them remarkably strong, with stamina that surpassed top human athletes. They ran up and down the mountain repeatedly until the drill was complete. Lucien then announced the next routine over the blowhorn: 2,000 push-ups, 1,500 pull-ups, 1,000 squats, and 500 leg raises. The peerage completed the exercises with ease, and Lucien was the first to finish. He divided the peerage into groups for sparring. He assigned Cammy, Kurumu, Sagat, Zangief, Saito, Chun-Li, and Jill to spar in 5-minute rounds before rotating. The assigned members bowed in acknowledgement and moved to begin their sessions. Lucien advised Camula to work on pyrokinesis and bat control for long-range reconnaissance. Camula acknowledged the order and disappeared among a flock of bats. He told Azula and Fouquet to train together. Fouquet was to build golems as quickly as possible without tiring, and Azula was to hone her fire and lightning powers by destroying Fouquet's creations as fast as they were made. Both acknowledged the plan. Lucien recognized the session was progressing well and decided to train his gravity powers as well, forming small localized black holes around himself to practice control. Sitri Field, Sitri Territory. 11 days remained until the raiding game. Issei asked why they were in the underworld. Rias explained that Sona had requested help to train her peerage for an upcoming raiding game. Issei had not known Sona had issued a challenge. Rias clarified that Sona had challenged her fiancé to a raiding game. If she won, she would not have to marry him. If she lost, they would marry immediately. Aquino teased Issei, reminding him that the fiancé was Lucien Vassago, heir to the Vassago clan. When Issei asked what was special about Lucien, Aquino noted that he was said to possess ultimate class powers already and had defeated a Mao in a duel. Rias confirmed that the Mao in question was Serafal Leviathan. They arrived at a small Victorian-style house in the field. Rias entered with her peerage following, and Tsubaki Shinra greeted them at the front door. Tsubaki informed them that the president was waiting and led them to the strategy room, where Sona and the rest of her peerage were gathered. Sona was reviewing dossiers containing photos and information on members of Lucien's peerage. Issei rushed over to his friend Saji, who bore the marks of a rough encounter, a swollen eye and a sore jaw. Saji replied with anger that Lucien had caused the injuries. Sona addressed the room, reminding everyone that the battle with Lucien was fast approaching and that she had enlisted Rias and her peerage to help train them. The visiting peerage would train alongside Sona's group to sharpen their skills. Sona instructed that each trainee would practice with the corresponding piece from Rias's peerage and indicated the training sheets she had prepared, stacked on a table with simple name tags showing which piece each sheet corresponded to. She then dismissed the group. The combined Gremory and Sitri peerages acknowledged Rias, collected their workout sheets from the table, and left to begin training. After the others had departed, Sona turned to Rias and asked for help creating a plan to beat Lucien. Rias suggested they begin by analyzing the dossiers. Sona noted that Pawn 1 was Chun-Li, a former Interpol agent and competitor in the Second World Warrior Tournament, a master of hand-to-hand combat and firearms. Rias asked if Chun-Li possessed any sacred gear, and Sona replied that she had found no evidence of any. Rias judged Chun-Li not to be a significant threat and asked to move on. Sona continued to Pawn 2, identifying Jill Valentine as a former member of the U.S. Army's Delta Force and a founding member of the BSAA, with a reputation for excellence in combat and firearms. No sacred gear was apparent. The next dossier described Hiraga Saito, who had disappeared for 2 years and recently resurfaced. He was rumored to have stolen a fighter jet from the Japanese Self-Defense Force and claimed to have spent time in another world with a woman named Louise. Sona expressed worry that he claimed to have fought a 70,000-man army there and, although he had no sacred gear, possessed a foreign power that allowed him to wield many weapons. Rias considered that problematic, noting he might be able to hold off the peerage if those claims were true. Sona said she would try to factor him into her plans and moved on to the next file. Sona identified Rook 1 as Sagat, a Muay Thai champion nicknamed the God of Muay Thai, a competitor in the First World Warrior Tournament, and believed to be one of the leading members of Shadow with no sacred gear. Rias observed that his legendary fighting ability could pose problems. Sona then described Rook 2 as Zangief, a professional wrestler who had participated in the Second World Warrior Tournament, said to be powerful but slow and possessing no sacred gear. Rias noted that his lack of speed should present opportunities to take him down. For Night 1, Sona reported Kurumu Kurono, believed to be a supernatural being from Yokai Academy with charm-based abilities of average strength. For Night 2, Sona named Cammy White, a member of Shadowless Assassination Squad, and Delta Red, a master of hand-to-hand combat with no sacred gear. Rias acknowledged the information and moved to the next file. Sona announced Bishop 1 as Matilda de Saxon-Gotha, also known as Fouquet the Crumbling Dirt, who claimed to be from a different world and had the ability to conjure golems several stories high, with no sacred gear. Rias warned that the golems could be troublesome and asked whether they had anything to counter them. Sona explained their plan to lay traps to stun the golem and attack Matilda when she was distracted. Sona named Bishop 2 as Camula, believed to be a vampire. Rias reacted with widened eyes and asked how he had obtained a vampire in his peerage, explaining that vampires were said to be very antisocial with other races and thus incredibly difficult to fight and subjugate. Sona reminded Rias that they had Gasper, and Rias replied that Gasper was different and that this Camula could be a full-blooded vampire, expressing concern. Sona then opened the Queen file. She identified Queen 1 as Azula, the Fire Princess, royalty from a place called the Fire Nation, believed to manipulate fire and lightning, and a master in hand-to-hand combat. Rias suggested Azula might have abilities similar to Aquino. Finally, Sona revealed the king as Lucien Vassago, heir to the Vassago clan, master of gravity manipulation, illusion creation, and mind reading, and a brilliant strategist with ultimate class potential in the near future. Rias reviewed the dossiers and admitted concern. She noted that Lucien's pawn, Saito, could be troublesome if his abilities were true, the bishops might create defensive barriers, and the queen might be on par with or even stronger than Aquino. Sona looked out the window at her peerage training with the Gremory peerage and vowed to find a way to prevail. Rias placed a reassuring hand on her fellow king's shoulder and affirmed that she would. 9 days until the raiding game, at the Vassago training ground within Vassago territory, Lucien asked how Fouquet was holding up under 20 times gravity. Fouquet replied that it was nothing, conjuring 5 more golems as she trained. Lucien gave her an encouraging pat on the back and praised her resolve. 7 days until the raiding game, on the Sitri field in Sitri territory, Rias assigned Sona's queen, Tsubaki Shinra, to train with Aquino. Sona believed Lucien's queen would have abilities similar to Aquino, so Tsubaki was to mimic those techniques. Both queens responded enthusiastically and began training together. Lightning was visible throughout the day as the 2 queens sparred and practiced. Everyone else continued their own drills while Rias and Sona circulated to monitor progress. Issei and Saji worked on controlling their sacred gears. Kaneko and Kiba trained alongside the rooks and knights respectively. The bishops trained with Asia to enhance their magical capabilities. Sona and Rias reviewed information on Lucien and his peerage, searching for weaknesses. Rias reassured Sona that they would find one. 5 days until the raiding game, back at the Vassago training ground, Lucien increased the gravity to 50 times and was pleased to see his peerage adapt with little trouble. He and his queen reviewed files on the Sitri peerage to identify threats. Azula, Lucien's queen, reported that the 3 who posed the greatest concern were the Sitri king, the Sitri queen, and their male pawn. She explained that the Sitri king controlled water, the Sitri queen could reflect damage as demonstrated in her battle with the Gremory peerage, and the pawn possessed 4 sacred gears. Lucien said that Sona did not pose a direct threat to him, that he had a plan to counter the queen's reflective ability, and that the pawn's sacred gears should not be a problem. He then announced that he would visit his cousin briefly to pick up some items the cousin had created. Lucien traveled to Ajuka's workshop in Satan's palace, Lilith. Ajuka asked what he could do for his cousin when Lucien materialized in the room. Lucien explained that he believed Ajuka had received the blueprints for several inventions and had come to collect the final products. Ajuka retrieved a crate from the corner of the room and handed it over, admitting surprise at some of the designs and noting their elegant simplicity. Lucien expressed his thanks, and Ajuka brushed it off modestly, saying that creating things was his pleasure. Lucien bowed and told them he would see them later as a portal took him back to the training ground. A twisted smile appeared on his face as he materialized in Vassago territory. He looked out the window and thought that Sona would be in for a surprise. Underworld, Sitri Field, Sitri territory. 3 days until the raiding game. Training had been going very well in Sona Sitri's eyes. Saji, her pawn who possessed several sacred gears, was extremely motivated and practicing tirelessly. Her queen had become considerably better at using her mirror Alice and now had a feel for what Lucien's queen could do after sparring with Aquino. The rest of the pieces had all improved markedly. Best of all, Sona and Rias had formulated a plan to defeat Lucien and his peerage. Rias inspected the plan sheet and asked whether Sona was sure it would work. Sona examined her notes and expressed confidence that it would. Underworld, Vassago training ground, Vassago territory. 1 day until the raiding game. Lucien was elated. The new materials Ajuka had provided were working perfectly. His peerage had become stronger with the new weapons available for the raiding game. Training had been intense, morale was high, and Lucien reclined in his chair thinking about the future. He thought to himself that tomorrow Sona would be his. Day of the raiding game. Both kings gave last-minute pep talks. Both peerages were supremely confident. Rias Gremery and her team offered final encouragement to the Sitri peerage. Everyone wore their Crow Academy uniforms because Sona insisted on having the battle take place there. Lucien agreed, convinced of victory. Lucien's peerage wore special outfits for the day. Lucien wore a replica of Napoleon Bonaparte's uniform adapted with a holster and a sword sling. Azula wore her Fire Nation attire. Fouquet wore a black form-fitting robe with a red cape. Camula wore her usual dress in black at Lucien's suggestion. Kurumu changed to a black vest and matching skirt. Sagat retained his Muay Thai pants and wrist wraps in black. Zangief wore black wrestling trunks with a gold belt despite Lucien's annoyance. Hiraga Saito wore a black tracksuit trimmed in white and painted his sword black. Jill Valentine wore a black catsuit and had her hair colored black at Lucien's request. Chun-Li wore her qipao in black with gold trimmings. They all listened attentively to their master. When Lucien concluded his remarks, his peerage erupted in a loud cheer, energized and ready for the raiding game. The Sitri side responded in kind after an emotional speech by Sona. Both kings announced it was time to enter and simultaneously summoned portals to teleport their peerages to Crow Academy. Lucien and his group landed in the Occult Research Club room while Sona and her team appeared in the Student Council room. Grafia identified herself over the school announcement system as a maid from the Gremery household and stated that she would be the arbiter for the raiding game between the Sitri clan and the Vassago clan. She explained that the match would be televised for the entire underworld to view, that the Sitri base would be the Student Council room and the Vassago base the Occult Research Clubhouse, and that for pawns to promote they would need to reach the enemy base. Grafia announced that the raiding game would commence in 1 minute. Lucien told his peerage he was certain of their victory and urged them to go in. They answered in unison with a confident yes. Sona reminded her team to remember their training and to trust the plan. The Sitri peerage nodded and prepared as the clock approached noon. The bell rang at 12 and the raiding game between the Sitri and Vassago peerages began. From inside the Occult Research Club room, Lucien looked out a window at the surrounding land and addressed Azula, asking her to demonstrate why he was called the Herald of Destruction. Azula obliged, producing a flare of flame that shattered the windowpane. She launched herself out of the room on a jet of fire, unfurled bat-like wings, and from above, set the forested area ablaze in a spectacular, anime-style display that sent flames racing through the canopy. She watched the burning treetops for a moment with satisfaction before returning to her master. Lucien praised the sight and led his peerage outside for the next phase. Meanwhile, from the student council room, Shinra observed that Lucien was acting exactly as the recordings had shown. Sona acknowledged the observation and remained confident in her plan. In front of the Occult Research Clubhouse, Lucien instructed Camula to send out her bats to the Sitri side for reconnaissance. Camula complied and her bats flew into the sky. Lucien reported that Matilda had finished tunneling and assigned Cammy, Saget, and Zangief to guard the clubhouse, producing holographic images of his peerage to serve as decoys. Everyone reacted with surprise. None had seen Lucien use such tactics before. Cammy touched one of the images in astonishment. Lucien clarified that they were not real but moving dummy images. Azula explained that Sona expected them to wait for the fire to die down and engage openly, and that Lucien's use of decoys would create the illusion of his full peerage in place. This deception would allow them to strike on both flanks when the Sitri team anticipated only a head-on attack. Lucien approved of the plan and prepared to move. Lucien gestured for his remaining peerage to follow him into the tunnel Matilda had created. The group answered in agreement and filed in behind him. The tunnel ran about 20 feet underground, burrowing beneath all of Kuo Academy and surfacing beneath the pool area. It sloped upward and passed only 2 feet below the pool's surface. Lucien's plan was to move under the academy to avoid a direct confrontation with Sona's peerage, and then promote 3 of his pawns to queens to secure a decisive advantage. The peerage walked single file with Lucien at the front, following their leader with wholehearted faith in his strategy. At the front, Lucien asked Camula for a status report on the bats. Camula reported that the bats were perched above the student council room and listening to the council's plans. When Lucien inquired about what they had heard, Camula said the bats had picked up talk of ambush points being set at the gym and the main school building. Lucien decided to recall the bats and redeploy them as overhead surveillance to track the opposing peerage's movements, smirking as he led his group deeper into the tunnel. Meanwhile, in the student council room, Sona asked her queen, Tsubaki, whether Lucien's forces had left. Tsubaki looked out the window and confirmed they had. With the immediate threat gone, the council moved on to their real strategy. Tsubaki explained that the surveillance tapes showed Lucien typically sent his bats for reconnaissance, presenting an opportunity to feed him false information. Sona asked to review the plan one last time, and the peerage responded with eager agreement. Sona summarized the intelligence. Lucien tended to provoke an enemy into attacking once he had cleared an obstruction, and when that failed he attempted to outflank opponents with a pincer movement. The council would not allow this. They planned to reinforce the schoolhouse as a staging ground, create decoys to drain his forces gradually, and then strike from multiple directions after emerging from the assembly hall and pool area. Tsubaki asked if anyone had questions. None were raised. Sona then assigned positions and roles to each member of her peerage, who nodded in agreement and dispersed to their posts, confident in the plan and awaiting the arrival of the Vassago peerage. Deep within Gremory Castle, a VIP lounge hosted representatives from the great powers. Surzex had freed himself from his wife's entourage and watched the match with his son Milikas. Serafal had fully recovered and, clad in her magical girl costume, offered spirited support for her sister's struggle against Lucien. Ajuka had come out of seclusion to recline and watch with interest, while Falbium Asmodeus slept across a couch, much to the mild annoyance of the assembled guests. Azazel, governor of the fallen angels, attended to observe Lucien Vassago's capabilities and assess any future threat. Barakiel had come with his daughter Aquino, who was bonding with her father and waiting to see Lucien's queen in action after hearing rumors of her strength. Michael and Gabriel of the Seraphim were present to evaluate Lucien's power, having heard reports that he had defeated Serafal Leviathan in a duel. The Gremory peerage watched closely, supporting both friends and rivals. Rias quietly hoped Sona would prevail against Lucien, whom she found worrying. Issei felt a mixture of excited fanboy nerves and concern for his friend and rival Saji, thinking back on their training in preparation for this match. Issei then asked Rias why Lucien had not attacked yet. Rias explained that Lucien was very patient and preferred to wait until conditions were ideal before overpowering opponents in an open fight. Aquino added that he appeared to be waiting until the forest had been fully cleared before making his move. Ajuka turned to Surzex and asked his impression of the match. Surzex praised the strategic use of destruction and terrain to gain an advantage. Ajuka expressed eager confidence in his cousin's chances, which prompted Serafal to rise, scold him in a playful but firm manner, and tap him with her wand for jinxing her preferred outcome. The tension between the two Satans was mostly playful, though Surzex, caught between them, simply asked for quiet so they could watch. The others pitted his position and then returned their attention to the screen. Back in the tunnel, Lucien announced they had reached the area under the pool and complimented Camilla on her decision to leave 2 bats in the student council room. Camilla thanked him, suppressing a slight blush. According to her surveillance, only 2 members of Sona's peerage were present in the council room, a pawn and a rook. Lucien emphasized that they needed to incapacitate those 2 long enough to impede the enemy without removing them from play entirely. If the opponents were eliminated, their own ruse would be exposed. Lucien addressed his peerage and asked if everyone understood. His peerage answered in quiet voices that they understood, their figures barely 2 feet below the surface. Lucien outlined the plan and pointed to Jill and Chun-Li, explaining that he would distort gravity around the 2 opponents so Jill and Chun-Li could knock them out from behind. He then gestured to Matilda to make an opening above them. Matilda followed orders and created a hole on the pool deck. Lucien was the first to leap through and caught Ruruko Nimra, the pawn, and Tsuburayura, the rook, completely off guard. He distorted the gravity around them, forcing their gravities toward each other and causing them to collide at tremendous speed. Stunned and disoriented, they were quickly neutralized by Chun-Li and Jill. Jill rendered the pawn unconscious, while Chun-Li did the same to the rook. Lucien instructed his peerage to secure the area and told Chun-Li and Jill to find something to restrain the 2 captives. The peerage moved into the locker rooms to verify the coast was clear and then returned. Chun-Li and Jill found nets and bound and gagged the rook and pawn. Lucien assigned Azula to guard them and stood by a window in the pool room. Lucien then telepathically contacted Cammy in the Occult Research Club room to confirm she could hear him. Cammy replied that she could, and Lucien ordered her to release the clones and have them march to the gymnasium. Cammy acknowledged and broke the connection. Lucien confirmed the plan aloud to his team, noting that they all had telepathic abilities. He praised their training and explained the next movements. Saito, Jill, and Chun-Li would wait at a corner of the main building for a signal. Matilda, Kurumu, Camilla, and Lucien would neutralize the defenders of the assembly hall. Once the defenders were dealt with, the waiting team should ascend to the highest floor, promote themselves, and fight their way out of the student council room. Azula was to remove the 2 bound Sitri members from play when she heard the signal. Everyone responded in agreement, and all but Azula left the pool area. The pawns slipped into the shadows of the main building while Lucien and his group hugged the outer wall of the assembly hall. Lucien remarked that Camilla's bats had indicated a knight and a bishop inside and asked Matilda to make an opening where he pointed. Matilda did so, and the group was immediately met with a burst of fire from Bishop Momo Hanakai, who stood behind the podium with a knight nearby. The team took cover behind seats at the far end of the hall to avoid the blasts. The knight began advancing on them as they discussed the attack. Lucien assigned Camilla to use a new weapon and said that Kurumu and he would handle the knight while Matilda moved out of harm's way. The team responded and put the plan into action. Camilla produced a small sphere and flung it toward the podium. The device created a temporary black hole that exploded above the stand and swallowed the bishop. The arbiter, Graphia Gremory, announced the bishop's defeat, and Azula then struck the 2 bound Sitri peerage members with a bolt of lightning, rendering them out of the game. Graphia's voice confirmed that the pawn and rook had been defeated. Lucien and Kurumu confronted Tomo Meguri, a knight of the Sitri peerage. The knight charged with a katana, but Lucien dodged with ease and toyed with the attacker, shifting his position at the last moment to frustrate her. After several feints, he delivered a backhand that sent the knight stumbling into a wall, leaving her dazed. Kurumu moved in and delivered a decisive, non-graphic strike that incapacitated the knight. Graphia announced that the knight had been defeated. Meanwhile, the 3 pawns of the Vassago peerage leapt to the top floor and smashed open the student council room's window. Finding the room deserted, all 3 were promoted to queens. Lucien telepathically checked in with Cammy. She confirmed that all 3 had been promoted to queens, and Lucien instructed them to meet him on the roof. They acknowledged and began their ascent. The 3 new queens made their way out of the student council room and encountered Rhea Kusaka, Sona's other bishop, who attempted to stop them. She was swiftly defeated by Sato's blade, Delphinga. Graphia announced the bishop's defeat. The 3 continued to the stairwell and proceeded to the roof, where they opened the door and found Sona Sitri and her queen, Tsubaki Shinra, waiting. Ku, Matilda, Camilla, and Lucien joined them on the roof moments later. Lucien greeted Sona with a smug gesture toward his assembled peerage and complimented his own display of planning. Sona responded by summoning 5 water dragons that surged toward Lucien. He accepted the challenge and created a black hole that absorbed the dragons before it dissipated. He directed the 3 newly promoted queens to handle Tsubaki while he focused on Sona. The 3 advanced cautiously toward Tsubaki, who wielded a naginata. Their initial attacks were repelled by the weapon's reach, and they struggled to close the distance. Saito then launched a reckless rush at the Sitri queen, who summoned her sacred gear, Mirror Alice, to counter him. Saito struck a mirror. It shattered and released a wave that lunged at him, but Lucien materialized a black hole that absorbed the attack and explained that he needed his queen. Sona, seeing Lucien distracted, summoned several water lions to press the assault. Lucien's queen flew up to the roof and used lightning to obliterate the constructs. Azula declared that no one would harm Lucien and then fired a bolt of lightning at Tsubaki, who was still recovering from her Mirror Alice use. The strike knocked Tsubaki off the roof and Sona's queen was defeated. Lucien told Sona that, since she was the only one left, she should surrender and end it. At that moment, Saji emerged onto the roof and struck while Lucien's back was turned, using his sacred gear absorption line to latch onto him. He then activated his second sacred gear, Blaze Black Flare, igniting the line with Lucien caught on it. Lucien cried out as fire burned him, and the Vassago peerage reacted in alarm. Kurumu and Matilda rushed to interrupt Saji. Kurumu slashed with her nails while Matilda hurled earth spears. Azula channeled lightning to sever Saji's connection and free Lucien. Lucien approached the barely conscious Saji, furious at being burned, and warned his peerage not to interfere. He demanded Saji's attention and berated him as a low-class devil. Saji spat in his face, which only provoked Lucien further. Lucien then threatened to make him pay in the most agonizing way. Sona appealed to the rules, reminding everyone that there was no killing in a raiding game, but Lucien coldly suggested that an accidental death could be permissible. He manipulated gravity to lift Saji into the air and force his limbs into harsh, unnatural positions, inflicting intense pain without any graphic injury. Saji cried out and teetered on the edge of consciousness as Lucien increased the pressure, driving the scene into a violent, stylized confrontation rather than anything explicitly gory. With tears in her eyes, Sona launched herself at Lucien and tackled him, declaring that she would concede. She resigned, and Lucien Vassago emerged the victor. Lucien embraced Sona with quiet confidence, certain she would see things his way. He told her he could not let her pawn escape so easily and called on his queen, Azula. Azula responded eagerly and unleashed a flash of lightning that struck the pawn, rendering Saji unconscious. The moment ended abruptly, and the last thing Saji registered before losing consciousness was Lucien asserting that Saji would never get it. In the VIP viewing room at Gremory Castle, in the underworld, everyone sat in stunned silence. They had just watched Sona Sitri, a brilliant tactician and capable leader, be decisively outmaneuvered by Lucien Vassago, who had not lost a single piece. Lucien then promoted 3 pawns to queens, a feat so rare it had only been accomplished once before in the raiding game's history, and the sight shocked every devil in the room. Fallen angels and angelic leaders Azazel and Michael exchanged concerned looks, troubled by the magnitude of Lucien's power and already thinking of ways to counter it. Gabriel turned to Michael and asked what they had just witnessed. Michael warned that they had seen a being capable of disturbing the balance of power. The 2 seraphs nodded to one another and prepared to return to heaven to report the events. Michael expressed gratitude for being allowed to observe the raiding game, and Surzex returned the thanks with a smile, offering to have his servants escort them. 2 attendants accompanied the angels as they departed the castle and flew back to heaven to relay what they had seen. Ajuka teased Seraphal with a proud reminder that he had been right, and Seraphal responded with a fierce glare. Surzex hurried to intervene, anxious to prevent the 2 Satans from clashing in his castle and causing unnecessary destruction and, as he put it privately, extra paperwork. Rias and her peerage were perhaps more stunned than anyone. They had faced Sona and her peerage in a previous rating game and knew firsthand of Sona's intellect, so seeing her so thoroughly bested left them reeling. Rias was particularly shaken to watch a rival king fall at the hands of Lucien, who had shown interest in her in the past. Aquino observed Lucien's queen, Azula, and recognized a formidable adversary in her. Issei watched in horror as Lucien overpowered Saji and began to consider how he might help his friend once the immediate crisis passed. The three Satans reacted in their own ways. Ajuka beamed at his cousin's victory and took satisfaction in seeing the weapons he had developed tested in combat. Surzex remained openly stunned by Lucien's display, having known he was powerful from an earlier duel with Serafal but now taken aback by his tactics and strategy. Surzex reflected that Lucien was both powerful and an exceptional strategist. Surzex considered that he might be able to persuade someone to take Falbium's position. Serafal was very sad at Sona's defeat. She loved her sister and hated to see her in tears. She worried that her sister would be taken from her and considered what she could do about it. Underworld, somewhere in the capital of Lilith. A handsome young man in the room commented that the game had been interesting. A young girl agreed. The man wondered how the young man would fit into their plan and concluded that he would be useful. He announced that he was leaving for Kyoto and said goodbye to Ophis before departing. Underworld, Vassago Castle, Vassago Territory. Lord Vassago embraced his son tightly and praised him for a job well done. Lucien thanked his father and asked to be released from the embrace. Lord Vassago apologized, explaining that he was simply overjoyed and struggling to hold back tears. Lucien brushed the moment off and insisted the rating game had meant nothing. Lord Vassago proudly told his wife that their son had handled it without problems. Lady Vassago returned the praise and said that their son was the best thing they had ever had. Lucien privately reminded himself that he already knew he was exceptional. He bowed to his parents and excused himself to his room, accompanied by his maid, Chelsea, thinking about the engagement party in 2 weeks and his plans for Sona. Underworld, Synod Hospital, Sitri Territory. In the ICU, Saji lay in critical condition after the rating game, severely injured by a powerful lightning attack. Medical staff moved quickly to stabilize him. A doctor told the nurses to monitor his heart and work quickly, and a nurse called for sterilized tools. The entire Sitri peerage teleported to Synod Hospital to see their injured comrade. Momo Hanakai and Ruruko Nimura were especially worried because they had close feelings for Saji. A nurse informed the peerage that they could not be present in the operating room. Tsubaki Shinra explained that they were all members of Sona Sitri's peerage, and the nurse bowed and asked them to wait in the waiting room. Sona accepted and the group waited for hours. After several hours, a doctor emerged and explained that Saji remained in critical condition. The medical team had prevented immediate death from shock, but he was still far from stable and would need to remain under observation for at least 5 days. Sona and the peerage thanked the doctor, bowed, and teleported back to Sitri Castle. 5 days later, the results of the rating games still reverberated through everyone. Rias Gremory spoke calmly with her peerage at the Occult Research Club after school, explaining that Saji was still receiving treatment at Synod Hospital and was therefore absent from school. A dark unicursal hexagram appeared as a magical circle in the middle of the club room, releasing a dense black mist that cleared to reveal one person. Rias recognized Lucien, the heir of the Vassago clan, dressed in a black blazer, white shirt, and jeans. Lucien addressed Rias by name without a formal title, which caught everyone off guard because that was considered disrespectful. Issei reacted angrily to Lucien's tone and manner toward Rias. Lucien dismissed Issei and asked whether all pawns behaved like that these days, comparing him unfavorably to previous opponents and insulting him openly. Issei defended Saji, pointing out that he was still critically injured because of Lucien's actions. Lucien replied that the injured man had not known his place and that interacting with a high-class devil while being a lowly pawn could have severe consequences. He suggested the outcome had been deserved, speaking with casual indifference. Issei activated his sacred gear, the boosted gear, and directed its energy toward Lucien as a show of force. Lucien calmly warned Rias to call off her pawn before he would be forced to end him. Rias, aware of Lucien's immense demonic power, ordered Issei to deactivate the boosted gear. Issei reluctantly complied and sat on the couch beside Kaneko. Lucien demanded an apology for the perceived insult and stared at Issei threateningly. Rias offered an apology and, together with Aquino, knelt before Lucien and asked him to accept their regret for her pawn's reckless actions. Lucien accepted the apology with a smirk and told them they could rise. Issei clenched his teeth at the display. When Rias asked why Lucien had come, he produced an ornate, flamboyant invitation from his coat pocket and handed it to Aquino. The invitation was for his engagement party to be held in 10 days. Lucien announced that he was leaving. Lucien told Issei to try and look presentable, speaking with a condescending air, and then used a magic circle to leave the room. Underworld, Synod Hospital, Sitri territory. Serafal entered Saji's hospital room with a playful peace sign. Saji, connected to a heart monitor, had been under observation for 5 days since the raiding game. He sat up when Serafal arrived. Serafal produced a small pouch containing a vial of phoenix tears and presented it to Saji, explaining that she had obtained it to help him heal. Saji asked how she had acquired it, and Serafal answered that it had taken some effort and a favor to the Phoenix family. Saji thanked her, and Serafal took her leave. Underworld, Vassago Castle, Vassago territory. 8 days remained until the engagement party. Lucien informed his parents that he was going to Lilith for a while and bowed before them. He wore a black leather jacket, a plain white shirt, and beige pants. Lady Vassago cautioned him to be careful, and Lord Vassago, speaking with intensity, urged him to stay safe and embraced him tightly. Lucien asked his father to let go, and Lord Vassago apologized and composed himself. Lucien then used a magic circle to transport to the Vassago Hotel in downtown Lilith. Lucien appeared in the hotel's opulent lobby, a space of lavish gold and immaculate decor. Maxwell, the elderly clerk with a gentle face and a neatly groomed mustache, greeted him by name. Lucien smiled and excused himself, stepping back out into the street. He had barely walked a few steps before a crowd gathered. Lucien's reputation and presence drew attention from devils of all ages. Fans pressed in, calling for autographs, declarations of devotion, and requests for photos. Lucien managed the attention with a practiced, charming smile and politely offered a signed photograph, using the commotion to slip away. A brief, chaotic scuffle erupted among some of the fans over the photograph, but it remained a non-graphic, frenzied jumble before Lucien distanced himself and adjusted his hair. Lucien walked several blocks under watchful eyes and entered a small shop intending to purchase a hat and sunglasses. The shopkeeper was visibly awestruck in his presence, but Lucien paid and left through the back door, rejoining the main street as his group of fans searched for him. 1 block behind Lucien, Tsubaki Shinra trailed him. She followed him down the avenue for 15 minutes, then watched him slip into a dark alley and enter a small warehouse. Tsubaki hid and moved silently from box to stay out of sight, eventually crouching behind a shipping container close enough to overhear. Inside the warehouse, Lucien called out, and Ophis responded. Lucien told Ophis that he would do his part. He expressed frustration that Chow Chow had failed, and Ophis spoke calmly of plans to remove Great Red from his home and of lending military support once she had more power. Tsubaki lowered her camera and took photos discreetly as the two discussed strategy. Ophis asked about the serpents she had provided, and Lucien replied that they made him feel stronger. When Ophis noted that a devil was watching them, Lucien acknowledged the presence and stated that the matter would be handled. Tsubaki turned to leave, but Azula was suddenly behind her. Azula struck with a quick, decisive blow that sent Tsubaki tumbling backward and left her unconscious. The confrontation unfolding in a swift, anime-style burst of action without any graphic detail. Her camera was still miraculously in her right hand as Azula dragged Tsubaki by the ankle toward Lucien and Ophis. Azula informed Lucien that Tsubaki had been spying on him. Lucien, irritated, replied that he already knew she had been following him since he had slipped away from the mob. Ophis announced that she would be leaving and then vanished. Lucien tilted Tsubaki's chin so they were forced to face one another. Tsubaki, barely conscious, explained that she had been following him on Serafal's orders because Serafal suspected him of conspiring with the Cow's Brigade. She spat in his face in defiance. Lucien chuckled and wiped the spit from his cheek, remarking that she was guilty as charged. Tsubaki called him a traitor. Lucien demanded that she look at him. When she refused, he reacted with sudden, aggressive movements. He shoved her and struck in a quick, harsh exchange that left her staggered and dazed. He then pushed at her while she was on the ground, forcing her to clutch her midsection from the shock of impact. Grabbing her collar, Lucien lifted Tsubaki and pressed his authority close. Tsubaki accused him of betraying the underworld and siding with terrorists. Lucien dismissed her view as a matter of perspective, declaring that he intended to liberate the underworld from the rule of the 4 weak Maos and replace them with a single ruler, himself. He tightened his grip and warned that Ajuka might become an unfortunate casualty in the inevitable conflict, admitting that he could not promise the plan would be accomplished without struggle. When Tsubaki demanded to know why he had married Sona if he planned to use her, Lucien insisted that his feelings for Sona were genuine and that she would stand beside him as queen when he took control. Tsubaki angrily countered that Sona would never accept such a future if she knew the truth. Lucien coldly replied that Sona would not learn of it and that Tsubaki would not be there to tell her, then hurled Tsubaki against the wall so that she slumped, barely conscious. Tsubaki tried to warn that others would be looking for her, but Lucien brushed it off and said they would not even know she was gone. He then used a controlled display of power to form a convincing duplicate of Tsubaki. Energy coalesced into a perfect likeness, indistinguishable at a glance. Lucien told Azula that the double was as real as the original and instructed her to ensure the real Tsubaki would not interfere in his plans. He added that she was not to be killed for now. He wanted Tsubaki to witness Lucien and Sona at the top of the underworld before anything more permanent was done. Azula agreed with a sadistic smile and then discharged a sharp burst of electricity that knocked the real Tsubaki into unconsciousness. With the double in place, Lucien told the impersonation to return to Sona to ease any immediate worry and to give Sona time with the person she trusted. He suggested it would be better for Sona to see Tsubaki now, since Sona would have less access once the marriage drew near. Lucien and the fake Tsubaki left the warehouse together. Teleported back to Vassago Castle, Lucien reminded himself that their wedding would take place in 8 days and felt the plan moving inexorably forward. 7 days until the engagement party. Underworld. Unknown location. It was pitch black in the underworld, but in the distance a small warehouse could be seen. Inside the warehouse, many glass aquarium tanks housed beehives and bee colonies stacked 2 stories high. Right next to a puddle of water, a man in armor with a cape talked to himself, furious and proud. Shalba Beelzebub raged that the devils had dared to deny him as their ruler, insisting he was the rightful heir to the name Beelzebub and vowing to take the underworld by force. A cold voice replied that he could keep telling himself that, and Lucien stepped down from the top of a tank, hood pulled low over his face. Shalba demanded to know who he was speaking to, still not recognizing him. Lucien replied that he knew perfectly well who he was addressing and called Shalba a leader of a false Mao, his tone laced with contempt. Shalba exploded in fury, insisting he was the true heir and launching a light spear at Lucien. Lucien created a small black void and swallowed the spear without effort. Shalba stammered in fear, beginning to identify Lucien when Lucien quieted him and made it clear he knew who had killed his cousin. Shalba responded by conjuring numerous light spears and hurling them wildly. Lucien dodged them with effortless grace. Lucien said he did not need to kill Shalba to achieve his purpose and then vanished from sight, warning Shalba to worry about himself. Shalba continued to fling spears at random, demanding Lucien show himself and challenging him as a true Mao. Lucien taunted that Shalba's threats were laughable and that he was growing bored of the confrontation. Then Lucien slipped behind Shalba and whispered a mocking boo in his ear. Shalba spun to stab, but Lucien caught his arm, performed a judo throw that sent him skidding across the floor and crashing into an empty aquarium tank. Lucien observed with disdain that such a weak devil deserved punishment for disgracing the underworld. Shalba pleaded for mercy, but Lucien merely used a gravity hold to lift him 10 feet into the air and render him unconscious. He then lowered Shalba gently and approached the injured, disoriented claimant. Lucien noted that Shalba had no objections to what he intended to take and removed a light manipulation glove from Shalba, finding it a perfect fit on his left hand. He tested the glove by creating a light spear and sending it through a wall, satisfied with the result. Lucien whistled a jaunty tune as he calmly walked out of the warehouse. Outside, Azula greeted him and asked if everything had gone well. Lucien replied that it had gone swimmingly and instructed Azula to destroy the warehouse. Azula carried out the order and set the building ablaze. Lucien then transported back to Vassago Castle with his queen, pleased to have acquired his new tool. 6 days until the engagement party. Underworld, somewhere in the capital of Lilith. A hooded figure entered a bar in a shady quarter of Lilith's capital, face hidden. The bar was full of unsavory activity, but the figure moved through it without alarm, heading for a guarded door in the back. The guard was a large devil with tan skin, an eye patch, and an unkempt beard. He gripped a bottle of whiskey and scowled. The guard barked that no one was allowed back there and ordered the figure to return to the main room. The hooded stranger calmly stated he was there to see the Black Fist. The guard insisted the boss did not want to see him and grabbed the figure by the collar, bringing his face close. The figure warned the guard to put him down before he got hurt. Before the guard could finish his scoff, a sudden concussive force struck him and he collapsed, knocked out instantly. The hooded figure checked himself for debris and noticed his cloak had been darkened by the incident. He mentally lamented that it had been a new cloak before opening the door. Inside the room were 9 devils. 7 sat around a circular table beneath a single bare bulb, playing poker and smoking Cuban cigars, while 2 large henchmen stood by the walls to look imposing. One of the henchmen demanded to know who the stranger was and how he had gotten past Roger. The figure replied in a condescending tone that his identity was of no concern to a mere peasant. The figure caused the 2 henchmen to headbutt each other, knocking them out instantly. The fat, pale-skinned devil in a tan suit ordered the stranger to leave at once, and all the devils at the poker table trained their killing intent on the intruder. The figure responded by releasing a killing intent more than 10 times stronger than the combined power at the table. The 7 devils, all high class, were stunned and fearful at how their own force paled beside the stranger's. The Asian-looking devil in a black suit asked what the figure wanted, voice trembling. The figure replied calmly that he only wished to procure their help. The black-skinned devil in a white suit repeated the word help in disbelief. The figure explained that he sought their henchmen, the 7 emperors of the crime world. A white female devil in a red business suit asked, shaking, how he knew of them. He answered that he knew many things, including their names, families, and, most importantly, their crimes, then asked if they would hear his proposal. An elderly white devil in a white suit and top hat affirmed. His manner suggested he was the group's leader. The figure outlined his plan in careful detail. The plan shocked everyone at the table. The black-skinned female in a green business suit protested that they were criminals, not terrorists, and a Hispanic-looking male in a purple suit echoed that the plan sounded like terrorism. The figure coldly warned that refusal would mean arranging for them to be sent to Cocytus for their crimes. The fat white devil scoffed and challenged the figure. The figure produced an interoffice envelope and tossed it at him. The elderly devil opened it and paled. The envelope contained photographs and records of each devil committing various crimes, evidence that, if delivered to prosecutors, would imprison them for decades. He passed the folder around. Each recipient reacted with the same fear. The black-skinned devil retaliated by unleashing a sudden barrage of ice knives at the figure. The figure raised his hands and formed a portal that swallowed the blades. Another portal opened behind the attacker and returned the barrage. The attacker was overwhelmed by his own attack and collapsed, incapacitated and severely wounded on the floor. The figure asked whether they had a deal. The unharmed devils looked to their leader. The elderly white devil considered each face before nodding. The others followed his lead and reluctantly agreed to help. The figure instructed them to meet at a specific location the next day and tossed a card with the time and place to the elderly devil. The card listed a warehouse district in Lilith. The figure apologized for the mess and backed out of the room, eyes never leaving the 6 angry devils. 5 days until the engagement party. Underworld, Warehouse District, Lilith. The 6 surviving devils waited in the cold, gathered in the open where the card had directed them. The meeting time had been 10 a.m., and now it was 10:05. The white-skinned female complained aloud about the delay. The Asian-looking devil told her to calm down and that he would arrive soon. The figure stepped from the shadows, startling them. None had detected his aura. He remarked sarcastically that he was sorry their friend could not make it. The black-skinned female demanded to know why he had called them out. The figure answered condescendingly that, where he came from, people greeted one another. The black-skinned female ground her teeth but was silenced by the elderly white devil, who reminded them that they were all busy and wanted to conclude the matter quickly. The figure tossed a briefcase at the group and told them he trusted they would bring the weapons. When they opened it, the case contained ID cards that would grant them access to Vassago Castle grounds, a cell phone for his calls, and the assignments they were to complete. Their eyes widened when they saw what the tasks required. The figure then released a wave of killing intent across them, and the Asian devil stammered a frantic refusal. The figure warned that any plans by their hidden teams to eliminate him had already failed. Those teams had been neutralized. He turned, stepped into an alley, and vanished in a swirl of magic. 3 days until the engagement party. Underworld, somewhere in the capital city of Lilith. Lucien Vassago walked down Main Street, window shopping and paying no attention to the crowd that had gathered and followed him. He addressed the crowd, calling them good devils and presenting himself as one of their kind. Lucien told the crowd to continue about their business, a fake smile etching his face. He inwardly considered himself far above these low-class people. The mob of mostly women reacted excitedly, and one man swooned. Lucien tossed an envelope into the air. The people scrambled for it, and he used the ensuing chaos to slip away. He warned himself not to give in to violence as he slipped into a narrow alley. He created a clone and sent it back toward the crowd while the real Lucien continued deeper into the passage. The fans pointed at the clone, allowing Lucien to move on unnoticed. Lucien came upon a small shop on the right side of the alley and entered. An elderly woman behind the counter asked lazily how she could help. Lucien introduced himself as Lucien Vassago and explained he was there for a fitting. The woman trembled and immediately apologized for her earlier disrespect. Lucien told her to stand and mentioned that he had other matters to attend. The woman said her husband would assist and called to the back. Her husband asked that the young master be sent in. Lucien proceeded to the fitting room and found an elderly tailor inside, a gentle-faced man with wide-rimmed glasses and a gray mustache. The tailor bowed and expressed that it was an honor to serve him. The tailor asked Lucien to remove his coat and outer layers so precise measurements could be taken. The next few minutes were spent with the tailor taking measurements while the tailor's wife watched discreetly through a small opening. When the measurements were finished, the tailor told Lucien he could redress. Lucien thought to himself that he already knew that and produced another polite smile. Lucien inquired how long the suit would take to make. The tailor replied that it depended on the material and asked which Lucien preferred. Lucien requested a white silk suit and was told it would take about 3 days. Lucien asked if it could be ready in 2 days. The tailor agreed but warned it would cost extra. Lucien accepted and said he would collect it personally. At the counter, the woman told Lucien the total was 8,500 gold pieces. Lucien placed a sack of gold on the counter. The woman opened it and counted the coins, then noted there were 15,000 inside. Lucien told her to keep the change, flashed a smile, and left. The tailor and his wife were visibly overjoyed. Lucien walked out of the alley, paused, and noted there was one more place he needed to visit. He continued for a few minutes and reached an apartment building owned by his family. Everyone who worked there knew him. At the grand lobby, a male receptionist greeted him. Lucien walked past and boarded the elevator, pressing the button for the private floor labeled G. The elevator descended to a rarely used level, a large, white, specially secured room that was resistant to detection and escape. This floor served as a private detention area for the Vassago household. Those who interfered with Vassago affairs were detained there. On this day, only one person remained, others had been removed from the facility. Lucien stepped into the room and approached the lone occupant. He addressed Tsubaki, who occupied the center of the space. Tsubaki, once a proud figure, was restrained and weakened from recent mistreatment. Lucien observed her condition with a smirk and asked how she was. Tsubaki accused him of being a monster. Lucien responded with a smug remark and asked about her treatment in a taunting tone, then laughed darkly at the situation. Tsubaki insisted he would not get away with what had been done. Lucien claimed otherwise, saying that they did not even know she was missing. He leaned in close enough to be menacing and tilted her chin up. In response, Tsubaki spat at him. Lucien wiped his face with a handkerchief and signaled for the elevator. As he prepared to leave, he told Tsubaki that she would not have to endure that condition for much longer, then entered the elevator and departed. Lucien told the person in the elevator that they would die after he and Sona were married as the doors closed. He left the building with a smirk and used a magic circle to teleport back to Vassago territory. He did not notice a magical girl watching him from afar as he activated the circle. Serafal watched and noted where Tsubaki was. 2 days until the engagement party. Human World, Kuo Academy, Japan. Issei asked Kiba if he had chosen an outfit for the engagement party. Kiba replied that he would wear a black suit while sitting next to Kaneko on the couch. Issei then asked Rias what she planned to wear, and Rias said she would wear a red evening dress. Issei became distracted for a moment and was playfully reprimanded by a fellow peerage member. Kaneko warned everyone to keep their thoughts in check. A magic circle formed in the middle of the room bearing the Sitri family mark, and everyone assumed Sona had arrived. They were surprised when Serafal Leviathan appeared instead. Rias bowed and greeted Serafal. Serafal greeted Rias and the peerage cheerfully, then her expression turned serious as she told them she needed their help. She explained that she believed the real Tsubaki was missing and that the Tsubaki seen at school with Sona might be a fake. Serafal described how the Tsubaki she encountered had not reacted when told that Kiba would attend the engagement party, which was out of character since Tsubaki was known to care deeply for Kiba. She added that she had been following Lucien the previous day and had seen him enter an apartment building owned by the Vassago clan and emerge with an ominous look. Rias asked if Lucien might have been on official business, given his family ownership of the building, but Serafal insisted she was sure of what she had seen. Rias then asked what Serafal wanted them to do. Serafal requested that Rias's group investigate the building in disguise because Serafal would be recognized there while Rias's team would not. Issei noted that Serafal was well known in the underworld because of her show, and Serafal recommended wearing disguises. Rias asked Serafal for the location. Serafal handed Rias a piece of paper with the address and then signaled and teleported away. Rias conferred with her peerage about who should go. She named Issei, Zenobia, Kaneko, and Kiba as the investigation team. Issei raised the concern that a large group might attract suspicion, and Akino laughed softly at the observation. Rias decided that Kaneko would not join the mission. When Issei asked when they would go, Rias said they would leave the next day, and the three agreed in unison. 1 day until the engagement party. Underworld, Lilith territory. A tailor and his wife bowed as Lucien thanked them for his new suit. Lucien admired the craftsmanship and expressed his appreciation before leaving with his pawn Saito carrying the garment. Saito complained about having to carry it, and Lucien fixed him. With a cold, cutting stare and spoke in a tone that made Saito visibly nervous. Saito quickly apologized and handled the suit carefully. They walked toward where they planned to teleport back to Vassago Castle, but Lucien paused to contact his queen Azula telepathically. After receiving a report from her, Lucien commended her on the information and dismissed her to return to the castle. He sent Saito ahead by making a magic circle for teleportation and continued alone. Lucien approached the apartment where he had been keeping Tsubaki. He entered the lobby and was irritated to find his receptionist asleep on duty. He muttered about the receptionist's negligence and then hid in a stairwell to wait for his guests to arrive, preferring to greet them when they appeared. Back in the lobby, Issei asked Kiba if he had found anything. Kiba replied that he had not found definitive evidence, but he was certain he had felt Tsubaki's demonic energy in the area. Kiba stated seriously that someone must be hidden somewhere. Issei asked Zenobia what she had found. Zenobia reported that she had not found Tsubaki but had discovered a small item in a pouch. Issei reacted with surprise and annoyance. Zenobia, apparently unaware of his irritation, continued without elaboration. Issei suggested they report back to Bucho since they had found nothing else. Lucien interrupted them as he approached, questioning why they had entered his building without proper courtesy. All three of them called out his name at once. Lucien answered with a mocking, patronizing tone as if addressing a child. Zenobia explained that Rias had sent them to look for Tsubaki Shinra because Serafal suspected Lucien of kidnapping her and replacing her with a clone. Issei berated Zenobia for blurting out the information, and she replied calmly that Lucien had asked. Lucien sneered at Rias's team, deliberately taunting them. He stirred anger in Zenobia and Kiba with his words, and he prodded Issei with insults meant to provoke. Issei snapped and prepared to attack, drawing his sacred gear. Lucien replied that he did not need anyone to protect him, and with a distortion of gravity he slammed Issei into a wall. Issei slid down to the cool, silver floor. Issei fired a dragon shot at Lucien. Lucien watched it briefly, then dodged and closed the distance. Before Issei could react, Lucien grabbed him and restrained him fiercely, pressing down until Issei lost consciousness. Zenobia and Kiba rushed forward in alarm while Lucien coldly held Issei and kept the others at bay. Kiba readied a sword of betrayer and Zenobia prepared ex-durandal. Lucien warned them to be quick, then casually tossed the now unconscious Issei against the wall. Kiba and Zenobia charged, but Lucien easily evaded their strikes. He stood calmly as their attacks came up empty, taunting them for being too slow. Sensing an opening, Zenobia activated Excalibur's ability, rapidly, to close the distance. Lucien countered by shaping a gravity sphere around his right fist and struck Zenobia while she was airborne. The impact knocked the wind out of her and sent her crashing into the wall near the unconscious Issei. Lucien turned his attention to Kiba and smiled with the same haughty confidence. Realizing he was outmatched, Kiba reluctantly admitted defeat and surrendered. Lucien ordered them to gather their companions and leave. Kiba helped Zenobia to her feet. Zenobia hoisted Issei onto her shoulders and they began to make their way to the door with Kiba at their side. As they left, Lucien told Kiba he would be wise not to return and brusquely shoved him aside before exiting the building. Lucien teleported away toward Vassago Castle, thinking that tomorrow would be the day everything began. 5 hours remained until the engagement party. On the outskirts of the former fallen angel capital of Ada Eri, a warehouse hummed with activity. Figures moved among stacks of weapons, and a podium stood near the opening. A female devil asked their boss why they were operating in fallen territory. The fat white devil in red body armor reminded her not to forget their purpose, checking his watch impatiently and asking where the others were. A tall blonde woman in a black battlesuit and sunglasses appeared at the doorway, accompanied by a young dark-haired man in a black three-piece suit and sunglasses. The fat white devil acknowledged the arrival of the female crime boss, and another associate received his greeting in turn. Arya assessed the assembly of over 200 devils, including the peerages of the attending crime bosses, and asked about the support they had managed to secure. Misael explained that devils these days considered both the money and the job before agreeing, lamenting that not everyone was as unquestioning as in the past. Arya acknowledged his point, then whistled to capture everyone's attention. Arya announced that they were preparing to attack a fallen angel government installation and asked for a report on the capabilities available for the operation. Arya called for anyone who used a sacred gear to raise their hand. 30 devils complied and stepped forward. They formed a line while Arya moved down it, asking each for their gear. The first few devils answered that their gear was twice critical, and several more gave the same response. The repetition frayed Arya's patience. A vein throbbed on her forehead as she face-bombed, drawing nervous snickers from the other crime bosses until her sudden, palpable killing intent silenced them. After a brief count, 20 of the remaining devils were dismissed back into the crowd. Arya then asked again which gear each remaining devil possessed. A tall, pale devil reported sword birth. A short devil described as Asian answered that her gear was Mirror Alice. The final devil, a short tan boy, did not respond when asked his gear. Arya raised her voice to demand an answer, but the boy only stared blankly. Haman explained that the boy was mute. Arya glared at Haman and accused him of withholding the information. Haman offered a wry explanation that he had been amused by the expected reaction and had kept silent. When Arya pressed for the boy's gear, Haman revealed that it was Telos Karma. A stunned silence fell over the room. Telos Karma was known as one of the top 13 sacred gears, one with the power to slay even gods. Misael looked on with envy at the presence of such a powerful peerage member. Arya jabbed a trembling finger at Haman, furious that he had concealed the boy for so long. Haman accepted the rebuke with calm resignation. Arya closed her eyes, exasperated, and rubbed her face before taking a breath to move the meeting forward. With the discovery of a Longinus-class user among them, Arya announced a change in strategy. The plan would be adjusted. They would assemble at the designated location and wait for a signal from the castle, press through their position when ordered, and then withdraw before enemy reinforcements could overwhelm them. She sketched the revised approach on a whiteboard for everyone to see. The assembled devils absorbed the new orders in silence until Arya finished with a curt reminder of the timetable. Underworld Vassago Castle, Vassago Territory. 3 hours until the engagement party. In the vast Vassago ballroom, a devil named Mangius barked orders at the devils arranging tables and chairs. The ballroom stretched the length of 3 football fields, with a grand French-style door, stained glass windows lining each side, and a magnificent chandelier suspended over the center. The devils setting the room were also preparing to act as waitstaff during the engagement party. Many of them were part of the planned attack. Lucien passed by, remarking on their progress with cool detachment. Mangius, startled, asked not to be surprised like that and then continued supervising the preparations. Nearby, a black-skinned female crime boss named Violisa complained about having to serve guests at their tables. Insisting it was beneath her, Mangius tried to soothe her, telling her she looked fine in the attire. Annoyed, Violisa delivered a sharp kick to Mangius's midsection, and he doubled over in pain while an older white devil named Zisur chuckled and offered him a hand. Mangius accepted the help and rose again. Zisur identified himself as the cook. They discussed logistics. Weapons had been placed near the bar for easy access, and Violisa had arranged for the bullets to be loaded with light rounds through a favor owed to Dradius of the fallen angel underworld. The rappelling teams would be in position by the time the party began. Lucien reprimanded them for dawdling and moved on. Mangius, watching Lucien leave, resented the heir's arrogance and the way Lucien's status insulated him from such labors. Underworld Vassago Castle, Lucien Vassago's bedchamber. 2 hours until the engagement party. Chelsea, the maid, gently nudged Lucien and reminded him that his father had instructed her to wake him. Lucien mumbled and rubbed his eyes, asking what time it was. Chelsea informed him that it was 6 o'clock in the evening. Chelsea looked at the clock by Lucien's bedside and noted that there were 2 hours until his party. Lucien groaned that he was awake and would take a shower, asking Chelsea to have his suit ready when he came out. He went into the bathroom and closed the door. After a 10-minute shower, Lucien found a pair of black briefs neatly folded by the sink. He toweled off, dressed, and returned to his room where Chelsea stood next to his new white silk suit, offering to help him get dressed. Lucien, annoyed but resigned, agreed as usual. Chelsea fitted him into the dress shirt, then the pants and blazer, and finished with dress shoes. Lucien instructed her to pick a cologne from the closet he had made for them, and she sprayed a scent on his back and then his front. Lucien examined himself in the mirror with arrogant satisfaction. They left the room together and walked to the ballroom. Chelsea accompanied him until he sent her on her way, then watched as devils began arriving at the Vassago ballroom 2 hours before the party was due to start. Many were dressed in fine clothes and arriving with dates. The women wore elaborate dresses, evening gloves, and jewelry, while most of the men wore 3-piece suits. Hair and fragrances filled the room. From the balcony, Lucien surveyed the crowd. He descended the left curving stair to move among the guests and made a contemptuous remark about Serorg, the so-called failure of the Bale family, as he passed Serorg and his date, Queen Keisha Abaddon. Serorg bristled with anger but was restrained by his queen. Ravel approached Lucien, and he greeted her with a fake smile and a brief, indifferent inquiry after her well-being. Ravel blushed as she replied warmly, and Lucien excused himself with another practiced smile, leaving her flustered. Zephyrdor Glaciolabalas arrived with his peerage and confronted Lucien. Lucien insulted the Glaciolabalas heir and suggested he leave, which enraged Zephyrdor. The heir lunged at Lucien, but Lucien anticipated the move, dodged, and countered with a swift, well-placed strike that knocked Zephyrdor unconscious. Lucien watched as Zephyrdor's peerage carried their master out of the ballroom and said that Zephyrdor would be fine as long as he did not return. Diehauser Belial and his wife then entered. Diehauser greeted Lucien with a smile, and Lucien bowed in return. Diehauser commented that the engagement party would be quite an event and moved on to find his seat, leaving Lucien darkly amused. Lucien spotted Sona in a white dress and took a drink from the bar, gently mixing it before presenting it to her as a gesture that was equal parts taunt and offering. Sona received the drink coldly and viewed it with suspicion before taking a cautious sip. Lucien offered a curt farewell and moved on. Devils from the Major. Families continued to arrive, Agars, Abaddon, and Belphegor, among others. Even Mephistopheles made an appearance, notable because of his work with the magicians. An hour before the official start time, the ballroom was packed and waiters circulated with appetizers. Lucien approached the three great Satans and bowed respectfully. Surzex greeted Lucien warmly, Ajuka beamed with pride, and Falbium responded in a lazy manner. Lucien asked after Seraphal, and Surzex explained that she had errands to attend to but would make a grand entrance when she arrived. Falbium added in a sleepy tone that she would no doubt arrive soon. Meanwhile, in the capital city of Lilith, Seraphal Leviathan walked toward the apartment building owned by Lucien. She recalled the planning that Rias and her team had discussed. Kiba had reported feeling faint traces of the missing person's energy, and Zenobia had agreed that the presence was very faint and likely hidden or protected. Seraphal had considered a basement as a likely hiding place and declared that she would go to rescue Tsubaki, then used a magical circle to teleport from the Occult Research Club. At the apartment building, Seraphal entered the lobby and passed a receptionist who was asleep at the front desk. She pushed the elevator button and waited. When the elevator doors opened, she was met by a sudden burst of flame from Azula, who warned her that Lucien had suspected she would do something like this. A tense confrontation began as the situation shifted toward action. Azula announced that she had to stop Seraphal, walked out of the elevator, and formed a fire whip. Azula charged at Seraphal and lashed out with the fire whip, but Seraphal created an ice shield that took the blow. Seraphal slipped back into the lobby and evaded a barrage of flaming discs sent by Azula. Azula ordered her to return, and Seraphal answered by summoning hundreds of ice knives and directing them at Azula. Azula dodged them all and responded with a large fireball. Seraphal rolled out of its path. Azula then formed a blade of fire and launched it, and Seraphal countered by forming an ice sword and striking back. Seraphal apologized as she attacked, but Azula closed to hand-to-hand range and pressed the advantage. Azula landed several hard, fire-augmented punches and a right roundhouse kick that knocked Seraphal down. Seraphal thought that Azula was too strong and searched for a way to turn the tide. Noticing water under Azula, Seraphal moved to act. Azula began to charge lightning and taunted Seraphal about having any last words. Seraphal froze the water beneath Azula, leaving her stunned, and then used the moment to encase Azula in ice. Seraphal then noticed the receptionist cowering behind the desk. The receptionist pleaded for mercy, hands raised in fear. Seraphal demanded to know where Tsubaki was. The receptionist stammered that a girl Lucien had brought a few days earlier was being held in the private jail below. Seraphal asked how to get there. He panicked and pointed out how to access the elevator and instructed her to hold down the G button. After giving the information, the receptionist fainted. Seraphal followed the instructions, held down G in the elevator, and descended to the private jail. She rushed inside and found Tsubaki seated and weak. Tsubaki addressed Seraphal respectfully. Seraphal moved to free her, frosting the chains and then breaking them with an ice sword. She helped Tsubaki up and carried her out. As they prepared to leave, Tsubaki said that they needed proof she had pictures of Lucien talking to Ophis. Serafal asked where the proof might be. Tsubaki recalled Lucien mentioning a central room. They returned to the lobby, confronted the unconscious receptionist, and followed his earlier directions down the hall to the last door. Serafal frosted the door and forced it open. Inside the dimly lit room, Serafal found a camera and went through its pictures. The incriminating photos were still there, and Tsubaki felt relieved to have something that could help get Sona away from Lucien. Serafal used a magic circle to transport them to Synod Hospital so Tsubaki could recover. Unbeknownst to them, Jill Valentine monitored the rescue from the surveillance room. Jill telepathically informed her master, Lucien, that Serafal had attacked, freed Tsubaki, and acquired the camera that incriminated him. Lucien replied that he had anticipated possible trouble and ordered Azula to meet him at the castle while directing the rest of his peerage to a safe house in Lilith. Jill then reported that Azula was frozen. Lucien snapped that she should be unfrozen quickly and ended the communication. At the start of the party, Lucien approached the Gremry heir and her peerage. Everyone was dressed for the occasion. Issei moved with an arm in a sling, and Zenobia steadied herself after suffering a cracked rib. Rias turned away from Lucien, cool and distant, and asked what he wanted. Lucien feigned hurt at her reaction and mocked her for protecting her peerage, accusing her of being swayed by loyalty. His comment earned hard stares from the others. Lucien waited for a response that never came, then declared that he would simply begin the party and strode away with a smug look. He joined his father on the balcony as Lord Vassago prepared to speak. Lord Vassago greeted the assembled guests and explained that the party celebrated his son's engagement, a union he claimed would benefit both the Sitri and Vassago clans and secure the future of their kind. The crowd applauded. Lord Vassago then invited Lucien to speak. Lucien thanked everyone for attending, promising that the night would be memorable and encouraging everyone to enjoy themselves. The guests applauded again, and the formalities ended as the party resumed. Lord Vassago praised his son for a fine speech as they descended to the ballroom. Lucien acknowledged the compliment. Lucien excused himself and turned away from his father. The door slammed open and Serafal rushed into the grand room, breathless and commanding everyone's attention. Lucien responded with a condescending remark about her arriving after the party had begun. Serafal accused Lucien of being a Chaos Brigade traitor, drawing shocked reactions from the assembled devils. Serafal called to Surzex to catch the camera and tossed it toward the crimson-haired Satan. Surzex fumbled but managed to catch it, and the pictures he saw left him stunned. He announced that the images showed Lucien with Ophis and accused him of betraying the underworld. Devastation and outrage spread through the room. Lucien protested that he could explain, but the crowd's uproar drowned him out. Serord Bale accused him of treachery, Lord Gremry labeled him a terrorist, and Sikvera Agars urged his death. Ravel Phoenix fired a blast of flame at Lucien, scorching his blazer but leaving him largely unharmed. Enraged, Lucien manipulated the chandelier's gravity and ripped it from the ceiling. The falling fixture struck the floor with devastating force, knocking several devils aside and putting 3 of them out of the fight. A waiter signaled danger, tossed aside his tray, and drew a gun loaded with light bullets. The other staff followed suit. Noble devils and terrorists clashed as outside teams rappelled into the ballroom and joined the chaos. Mangius signaled to Arya through a sleeve microphone that it was time, and the ballroom descended into full-scale pandemonium. Ravel and her family defended against terrorists with their fire powers. Serord Bale fought hand-to-hand, and his queen, Keisha Abaddon, used her power of hold to deflect many of the enhanced light bullets. Ajuka and Falbium coordinated their peers against the attackers with precise control of their Kankara formula. Serafal and Sona's peerage worked together, Serafal freezing assailants in place while the peerage subdued them. Rias and Surzex unleashed the power of destruction against any terrorists who approached them or their allies. Issei, Kiba, Aquino, Kaneko, Rosweiss, and Zenobia held the lines and protected Asia, who used her twilight healing to treat the wounded in a corner of the room. Tsubaki and the rest of Sona's peerage pushed through the terrorists to reach Rias's group. Despite their efforts, the terrorists' light bullets struck some devils. One of those felled was Dihauser Belial, who was taken out of the fight and did not recover. Saji reached Issei and informed him that Sona had been taken by Lucien. Rias, nearby, reacted with alarm. Tsubaki suggested that Sona had been seized during the chaos. Rias ordered Issei to assist Saji, and the two raced toward the exit at the stairs. They burst into the courtyard and saw Lucien sprinting past the entrance gates, carrying Sona in his arms. Issei and Saji pursued him into the night, running at full speed. At the gates they saw Lucien preparing to place the unconscious Sona onto a griffin. Saji called out and grabbed the Vassago heir's attention. Lucien made a cutting remark indicating he had no time for them and intended to escape with the griffin, while also threatening to kill those who interfered. Issei activated the Welsh dragon overbooster and armor enveloped him, while Saji readied his sacred gear. The two charged. Saji unleashed his absorption line toward Lucien, but Lucien parried and closed on Saji with speed far beyond ordinary devil standards. He struck Saji in the stomach and sent him skidding backward. Issei rushed forward to strike Lucien, but Lucien taunted that Issei was too weak to match him. Issei responded by pushing his boosts to the limit. Lucien countered with a focused gravity beam that slammed into Issei, knocking him backward. Saji tried to restrain Lucien with his shadow prison, but Lucien dismissed it, hurled Saji into the gate with tremendous force, and freed himself. As Issei prepared to enter Juggernaut Drive, Lucien manipulated the gravity around him and unleashed a brutal strike that struck Issei's leg, rendering him unable to continue fighting. Lucien then turned his attention back to Issei and struck him with a powerful, non-graphic blow that left Saji severely wounded and bleeding. Saji refused to surrender, but Azula appeared overhead and released a lightning attack that rendered him unconscious. With Saji incapacitated and rescuers approaching, Lucien declared the situation beyond salvation, boarded the griffin, and took off into the night. Azula warned that reinforcements were arriving. Surzex Lucifer, Rias Gremory, Ajuka Beelzebub, Asia Argento, and Ravel Phoenix emerged from the ballroom and rushed toward the courtyard. Lucien, contemptuous, informed Saji that he was leaving and then disappeared into the darkness with the griffin. Rias ran to Issei, tears in her eyes, and asked what had happened. Issei reported that Lucien had taken Sona away on a griffin. Issei struggled to speak, barely conscious, weakened from his injuries. Rias hushed him and called for help, directing Ravel to use her Phoenix Tears and asking Asia to tend to Saji. Ravel used the Phoenix Tears to restore Issei's missing limb, and Asia's Twilight Healing quickly mended Saji's wounds. Rias and Issei held each other tightly until a visitor arrived. Azazel entered and reported calmly that they had been attacked. Surzex reacted with alarm at the news. Azazel explained that one of their meetings had been assaulted by a group of devils and that the incidents might be connected. Surzex suggested Lucien Vassago might be working with Ophis. Azazel agreed he could be involved with the Cows Brigade but said something else was more troubling. Multiple sacred gear users had taken part in the attack, most wielding twice critical gears, and one among them possessed a Longinus, which Azazel confirmed was Telos Karma. Surzex considered the implications and questioned what motive Telos Karma would have for attacking his own engagement party or provoking the fallen angels. Rias urged that they find him quickly. Azazel agreed, then excused himself to return to his domain. The next morning, in the underworld at Lucien Vassago's safe house outside Lilith's capital, Lucien sat hooded on a couch watching television coverage of the attacks. The surviving members of his group stood behind him. Only Arya and Haman remained among the leaders, and many others were unaccounted for. The broadcast reported heavy casualties at Vassago Castle and at a fallen angel government meeting, noting that a prominent figure, Dihauser Belial, had been killed. Haman relayed the confirmation he had received from a contact in the Underworld Investigation Bureau. Misael, Vialisa, Mangius, and Zesur had died in the fighting. Lucien dismissed the report with practiced coldness and tossed a phone to Haman, telling him bluntly that plans had changed. Arya protested the alteration to their deal, but Lucien issued a chilling warning and drove them from the safe house. The two leaders and the remaining devils left, grumbling but without resistance. Saito asked Lucien what he would do now that the original plan had been disrupted. Lucien responded that a strategist always maintained contingencies and that he had already devised a new course. He intended to become king of the underworld by any means necessary. He signaled his peerage to leave him and strode to a back room. Inside, his bride Sona lay awake and visibly angry. Lucien attempted a sarcastic greeting, but Sona turned away and called him a traitor. When she refused to meet his eyes, Lucien's patience snapped. He asserted control, reminding her that she had been weakened by a drink he had given her and then restrained her to prevent further resistance. Sona spat at him in contempt. Lucien reacted with forceful, non-graphic aggression that rendered her unconscious. He whispered that she would learn to accept what he had done, secured her to the bed, and left the room. Outside, Lucien watched underworld police helicopters sweep the capital and outlined his next steps to Azula. He said he would do what Kokabeel had failed to do and start another great war, seizing control after the devils were weakened. Azula pressed him for specifics, and Lucien promised she would see his plan unfold in time. He offered a brief, possessive gesture to Azula, then returned to the warehouse to pore over his bulletin board and prepare his next move. Underworld Satan's Palace, Lilith. Seraphal slammed her hands down on Surzex's ivory desk and demanded to know what they were waiting for, insisting they needed to go rescue Sona. Surzex raised his hands and urged her to calm down, explaining that they needed to locate their target first. Seraphal protested that if they would not help she would go find Sona herself. Falbium, speaking with lazy composure, reminded Seraphal not to freeze the entire underworld and argued for patience. Any wrong move could put Sona in danger. Surzex agreed with Falbium and cautioned against pressuring Lucien, noting they could not be sure how he would react. Seraphal pouted but conceded that they needed to find Sona soon. Ajuka observed that Lucien was the kind of devil to provoke a response and that they only needed to be ready. Surzex settled back in his chair and stated that it had become a waiting game. Underworld Vassago Safe House, Lilith. Lucien Vassago sat in his safe house surrounded by the 40 or so devils who had survived the recent attacks. He kept his face hidden beneath a hood and cloak. Only those in his peerage knew his true identity. He explained his plan to his subordinates while they listened with a range of shocked and skeptical expressions. Lucien finished outlining the operation and asked if anyone had objections. One of the taller devils stammered that the plan sounded insane. Lucien reminded them of what he had already accomplished a few days earlier and reassured them that, by comparison, this was manageable. That statement reassured the taller devil, though a few others still harbored misgivings. Lucien offered further details. His peerage, and he would take down the base, signal the others to arrive in trucks to secure what they needed, and then leave a small detachment while creating convincing decoys to give the impression the base remained occupied. His calm confidence settled the remaining doubts. He invited any alternative ideas, and the assembled devils responded that they had none. Lucien dismissed them, and the group dispersed until only Arya and Haman remained. Arya smiled with curious playfulness and tried to peer beneath Lucien's hood, wondering what he looked like. Lucien gently stopped her and warned her not to try that again, then let an intimidating aura wash over the room that made Haman visibly nervous. Haman asked when the plan would be executed. Lucien noted that a storm was forecast for the following day and intended to strike then, as the weather would hinder detection. Haman acknowledged Lucien's audacity with respect. After a brief exchange of confirmation, Lucien left to confer with his peerage. The next evening, Underworld Fort Norlas, Belphegor territory. Lucien and his peerage teleported from Lilith and arrived just outside Fort Norlas, perched on a mountainside and battered by a thunderstorm. Fort Norlas was one of the most secure facilities in the underworld, home to the 144th Special Operation Battalion, also known as the Underworld Emergency Tactical Response Service. The Phoenix family had long provided commanders to that battalion, and the unit's reputation from the Great War had earned them the nickname Angel Slayers. Tonight, with the Eurus called away to Lilith to assist in the search for Lucien and the attackers, Lucien estimated fewer than 50 devils remained at the outpost. He signaled his peerage to move forward. They wore black tactical gear and ski masks, blending into the night. Except for occasional flickers of lightning, they advanced along the wall without being detected by the perimeter searchlights. Lucien instructed those with firearms to attach suppressors, and reminded the team to neutralize any threats they encountered. A few members carried guns: Lucien, Saito, Azula, Chun-Li, Cammy, and Jill Valentine, while others relied on their natural abilities. The weapons had been modified with light rounds to complement the group's powers. Lucien scolded Saito when he drew a sword instead of using a firearm, and Saito stepped back and complied. Lucien reviewed the plan. Azula would handle the left guard, he would take the right, and Jill would cover the approach near the supply box. A patrol walked by unaware, and the peerage struck with swift, coordinated actions. Lucien formed a spear of light that struck the guard on the right, sending him down in a controlled, decisive blow. Azula unleashed a surge of lightning that incapacitated the guard on the left without gore or lingering detail. The team moved with precision, each action swift and resolute. Lucien ordered Sagat and Zangief to move the bodies out of sight. Sagat and Zangief dragged the corpses behind a bush. Lucien then commanded his peerage to split up and eliminate any resistance, and his team saluted in acknowledgement. Lucien, Camula, Kurumu, Sagat, and Jill moved to the left while Azula, Fuke, Cammy, Saito, and Chun-Li took the right. Zangief remained to man the guard post after putting the fallen guard out of sight. Their plan was to advance along the flanks and meet in the north wing to decide the next move. Each group moved in single file and encountered several sentries, whom they dispatched swiftly, keeping their actions quick and precise. 2 patrolling guards remarked on how cold it was as they passed each other. Lucien registered it and signaled his pawn. She acknowledged the order. Lucien neutralized the guard on the left with a light spear while Jill fired 5 rounds at the guard on the right. 1 guard collapsed almost immediately and the other fell without struggle. On the right flank, Azula's team moved systematically through the barracks, quietly taking out sleeping soldiers. Azula produced an Uzi and finished targets with calm efficiency. Cammy and Chun-Li covered their sectors with their rifles. Saito cleared rooms with his sword while Fuke kept watch outside. They swept 5 barracks before rejoining Lucien's group at the north end. Lucien asked if there had been any trouble on the right. Azula, masked, reported no problems. Lucien decided it would be easier to gather any remaining soldiers in one place. He instructed his team to hide around the mess hall while he went to the command room to make an announcement drawing survivors there. The plan was for the team to eliminate anyone who arrived and then rendezvous in front. Lucien moved to the command room in the northwest of the base, taking out any soldier who blocked his path with his light spear. Azula and the others positioned themselves around the mess hall, and Azula peered through a window to count the occupants. She reported that 4 were inside. Cammy added that there should be some kitchen staff as well. At the command room door, Lucien listened and heard 2 men on the radio discussing missing communications in the storm. When 1 soldier left the room, Lucien followed and then neutralized him from behind with a light spear. He returned to the office and opened the door to find the 2nd soldier slumped in his chair. Lucien struck the man, who was badly wounded, and then ended the threat to prevent further alarm. As Lucien turned, the man in the chair leveled a weapon at him like a last reflex. Lucien complied briefly, then used the opportunity to finish the man before moving on. In the communication room, Lucien tested the public address system. He used the dead soldier's voice to broadcast a message instructing everyone to report to the mess hall for a special celebration. The announcement echoed through the facility and drew any remaining personnel toward the mess hall. 10 minutes after the broadcast, 5 more soldiers arrived at the mess hall, bringing the total number of occupants to about a dozen. The peerage spread out to cover the north, south, and west approaches to maximize their tactical advantage. Azula signaled to begin. She unleashed a bolt of lightning through one of the mess hall windows. The subsequent volley of gunfire was masked by the thunder, and spent shells scattered across the floor showed the result. The team emptied their magazines and then reloaded quickly for a second wave. They ordered Saito to enter and confirm the casualties. He went inside and found the aftermath of a violent firefight, with motionless bodies scattered throughout. Saito reported to Azula that everyone was dead, and Azula only smiled at the confirmation. Azula then announced that they would go meet Lucien and began walking toward the checkpoint on the far side of the base. After 10 minutes they reached a meeting point where Lucien stood with Zangief and 2 moving trucks, each carrying several devils. Lucien gathered everyone to outline the plan. He instructed Azula and the others to bring all the bodies together in front of the mess hall. He told the 5 devils from the first truck to retrieve uniforms from the supply room, indicating the location on their map. To the driver of the second truck he ordered the collection of weapons and ammunition from the armory, asking them to fit as much as possible into the vehicle. Zangief reported that a lone truck with a single devil had tried to approach earlier and that it had been handled. Lucien confirmed the driver was dead and gave the order to destroy the truck to keep it out of sight. Fouquet reported telepathically that the bodies had been gathered in front of the mess hall, and Lucien said he would be there shortly. He walked in the rain for 10 minutes before reaching the piled bodies. Azula confirmed they had checked every area they had entered. Lucien instructed everyone to stand back, then used his power to levitate the bodies and gather them into the air. He closed his eyes, raised his arms, and concentrated. A small yellow sphere coalesced at the center of the floating mass. Lucien invoked an ability he called Dark Creation and brought his hands together. The levitated bodies surged toward the sphere and their forms were transformed into brilliant, intangible light. The sphere began to tremble and emitted a tremendous shockwave that pushed everyone back except Lucien. The light shifted from yellow to brown to black as a compact void formed and began drawing everything inward. Lucien then produced a white sphere within that void. The opposing forces interacted and canceled each other, releasing an overwhelming burst of radiant energy that filled the area. When the light subsided, there was nothing left where the void had been. Lucien checked on his stunned peerage and asked if everyone was all right. Azula answered that she was fine, having lost her ski mask to the shockwave. The others, still blinking and wide-eyed, confirmed they were okay and continued to stare at the display of their leader's power. Lucien ordered them to proceed to the checkpoint. At the checkpoint, he assigned 6 devils to stay and instructed them to change into the uniforms from the barracks while he created dummy soldiers. He formed 50 soldier apparitions, kept 3 as sentries at the guard post, and sent the rest to the barracks. He confirmed with the truck drivers that they had everything they needed, then formed a large magical circle to transport the group to the Vassago safe house. At the safe house, Lucien directed the unloading of trucks, directing the devils to place weapons and uniforms where they belonged. Heyman asked how it had gone, and Lucien dismissed the mission as routine. When Arya asked about the next step, Lucien went to the bulletin board and pointed to 2 photographs tacked there. Heyman and Arya reacted with surprise at the identities on the board. Lucien told them those were the targets and reassured Arya that he would find a way to reach them. He believed he always did. They moved forward with preparations. 4 days later, in the human world at Kuo Academy in Japan, Lucien walked across the street with Azula in the disguise they had chosen for the operation. Lucien complimented the ingenuity of going undercover and explained that he had modeled his own appearance after Saito to avoid drawing attention. Azula asked why she had to adopt her new look, checking her phone as a mirror. Lucien said that the change improved her appearance, and Azula blushed at the praise. She now appeared as a striking figure, tall, with shoulder-length blonde hair, a heart-shaped face, green eyes, and clear fair skin. Lucien presented himself as a shorter student with messy black hair and an intentionally disheveled uniform. Azula asked again why that disguise was necessary, and Lucien reiterated that it would help them blend in. He assured her that he would always find a way to make their plans work. Lucien asked his blushing queen one last time if she could feel any demonic aura coming from him. Azula answered that she could not. Lucien said he felt none coming from her either and requested that she refer to him by his cover name while they were inside. The light shifted as they crossed the threshold. They reached the gates and saw groups of students parting to make way for a red-haired girl accompanied by a black-haired girl. Several girls called out to Rias and Aquino, addressing them as respected seniors. Rias and Aquino ignored the calls and walked to the front of the school. Both glanced at the milling students and silently noted the human crowd. They moved through the lobby together, drawing a few curious glances. Lucien asked Azula one more question about whether he should be concerned about their allies carrying out the plan. Azula said she had complete faith in them. Lucien smiled, said goodbye to Azula, and left her in the lobby to go to the attendance office. An elderly woman behind the desk greeted him and asked how she could help. Lucien introduced himself as Yusuke Sarai, the new transfer student. The woman recognized him and printed his schedule. Lucien accepted the schedule, bowed, and left the office. As he walked toward the classrooms, his shoulder brushed Rias's bag and caused her group to stop. One of the girls loudly demanded an apology. Lucien turned and asked why he should apologize. Another girl explained that the student was Rias. Lucien dismissed the notion that Rias should receive special treatment and walked away, leaving a puzzled Rias Gremory behind. Yusuke found his classroom and announced himself as the new transfer student to the teacher, who welcomed him. The teacher asked the class to greet the newcomer. Several girls reacted with excited whispers and playful comments about his appearance. A girl with glasses noted he had an exotic look. Lucien, thinking to himself not to lose his temper, introduced himself as Yusuke Sakurai in a disinterested tone. The class murmured. The teacher asked if there was anything else. Lucien said there was not and that people would learn what they needed to in due time. The teacher then directed him to sit next to Issei Hayadu. Lucien acknowledged the direction, bowed to the teacher, and moved to the desk beside Issei. Issei extended his hand and introduced himself as Issei Hayu, hoping they could get along. Lucien brusquely brushed Issei's hand aside and sat down, a gesture that earned several wide-eyed expressions from the class. Class passed quickly for Lucien. His memory, sharpened by his nature, made the lessons familiar. When the history teacher challenged him during a particularly dull PRD, Lucien answered correctly without lifting his head, then pretended to fall asleep and even allowed a soft snore to be heard. He enjoyed the small mischief of the moment. After the final bell, a girl who had watched him all day approached and commented on his apparent intelligence. Lucien said he had been considered a prodigy at his previous school and expected similar performance here. Asia Argento appeared behind him and expressed admiration. Across the room, Issei left with two other boys who cast interested looks in various directions, noticeably distracted. Lucien acknowledged the compliments and then left to find Azula in the third-year wing. He located her with her head down on a desk and telepathically checked on her. Azula confessed that the class was boring. Lucien asked her to bear with it and reminded her they would finish by the end of the day. He broke off the telepathic connection and continued on, only to bump into a student named Saji, who complained about being knocked over. Lucien smirked and moved on. The lunch PRD and subsequent classes slipped by. In one class, Lucien rested his head on the desk for much of the time, prompting the teacher to call on him. He answered correctly and then feigned sleep again. He found the quiet amusement of teasing others enjoyable. When the school day ended, a group of students approached Lucien to praise his abilities. Asia called out her congratulations. Lucien accepted the compliments with a reserved nod and prepared to continue with the plans they had set in motion. Lucien excused himself and left the room to follow Issei. He kept a careful distance as he descended the stairs and noticed Issei near the girls' kendo locker room. Lucien decided to provoke a reaction and tossed a rock toward the locker room. The girls emerged at once and caught sight of Issei, Matsuda, and Motohama nearby. One of the girls pointed a shurnai at Lucien and asked whether they had brought a friend. Issei shouted for everyone to run, and he, Motohama, and Matsuda fled. Lucien had to admit to himself that the girls moved far faster than he expected. The leader of the group declared that, since they could not reach the others, they would punish Lucien. Another girl identified him as the one who had brushed into Rias, which raised the group's hostility. The leader demanded retribution for the perceived disrespect to Rias, and a tense, hostile aura swept through the group. Lucien reflected with mild surprise on the intensity of their intent, then cracked his knuckles and removed his blazer. He remarked that the girls would not be much of a problem, then threw his blazer at one of them, creating an opening. As the other girls charged, Lucien used a judo throw to unbalance one and seized a shurnai, deftly parrying the blows that came at him. He moved fluidly, knocking opponents off balance and neutralizing their attacks in quick succession. One girl attempted to strike from behind and Lucien responded with a single, decisive blow that left her incapacitated. Within moments he had subdued 10 of them, leaving only the club captain standing, frightened by the display of skill and power. Lucien advanced toward the captain, shernai in hand, and told her that she was the only one left. She begged him to stop, but Lucien coldly refused. He tossed the shernai into the air to distract her, then struck, sending her to the ground. Lucien caught the shernai as he moved away, broke it cleanly over his leg, and walked out of the area, leaving many of the kendo club members sprawled and groggy on the ground. Fouquet reported telepathically that their task had been completed. Lucien replied telepathically that the target should be brought to the safe house and kept under constant guard, and that he would return shortly. Fouquet acknowledged and ended the communication. Unbeknownst to Lucien, a first-year student named Kaneko had observed the entire incident. She ran as quickly as she could to the Occult Research Club room and found Rias speaking with Aquino. Elsewhere in Kuo Academy's main building, a beautiful girl approached Asia with a piece of paper labeled storage room and asked for directions. Asia told her that the building was far away and, when offered, agreed to show her the way. The newcomer introduced herself as Sarah, and Asia introduced herself as Asia Argento. As they walked together, Sarah's expression briefly shifted in a way that unsettled Asia. In the Occult Research Club room, Rias asked Kaneko what had happened, concerned that something urgent had made Kaneko run so hard. Kaneko recounted what she had seen to Rias and Aquino. Rias noted that something felt off about the transfer student. Aquino observed that the new girl's Japanese was flawless for an American. Rias and Aquino wondered whether the two new transfer students might be devils or otherwise conceal unusual abilities. They agreed to investigate, and Rias suggested that they check the new male student first, since Kaneko's report indicated a potentially greater threat. Aquino offered to summon the rest of the peerage, but Rias said it was unnecessary for now. Moments later, Kiba, Gasper, Zenobia, Rosweiss, and Issei entered the room. Issei asked why Rias had called them, and Rias replied that they needed to look into a new student. Rias looked over her peerage and noted that Kaneko had seen him display a tremendous amount of skill and power that day. She then asked where Asia was, having noticed her bishop missing. Zenobia answered that Asia was escorting a new student to a building but should have been back by now. Aquino asked what the new student looked like, and Zenobia described a blonde-haired, green-eyed girl who appeared to be a third year. Rias and Aquino exchanged serious looks and Rias asked where they had gone. Zenobia pointed out that the paper the new student had carried said storage room, so they must be there. Rias urged everyone to hurry, and the peerage followed her. They reached the storage room quickly. Through a window they saw Asia Argento unconscious and bound with rope, and they could hear two voices inside. A male voice taunted Sarah, calling her a name with sarcasm, and Sarah objected in a pout. Aquino and Rias shared a look and decided to act. They burst down the door and stormed into the room. Issei demanded angrily who the intruders were and why they wanted Asia. Lucien revealed himself, his voice and appearance shifting back to normal. The entire peerage exclaimed his name together. Lucien responded by insisting on being addressed as Lord Lucien while inspecting his fingernails. Rias demanded what he had done with Sona. Lucien replied with a lazy list of insults and blows, claiming he had only hit and insulted her, nothing else. The atmosphere tightened as the peerage's hostility rose. Saji arrived with Sona's peerage, forming a line at the other door to block Lucien's escape. Lucien declared he could do as he wished with his wife and insulted the devils. Kiba lunged with his sword, but Lucien shifted gravity and sent Kiba tumbling back into the combined peerages. Lucien told Azula to take Asia away while he handled the others. Azula activated a magical circle and began to move Asia out as Lucien prepared to fight the Sitri and Gremory members. Issei and the peerage readied their sacred gears and aimed at Lucien, who regarded them with disinterest. Lucien glanced at his wristwatch and smirked, saying he had a minute to spare. Kaneko, Kiba, Zenobia, and Tomo Meguri charged as close-range fighters. Lucien evaded a sword slash and countered with a swift, exaggerated strike that sent Kiba out of the fight in an over-the-top, anime-style impact. He followed with a spinning kick that knocked Tomo Meguri out in dramatic fashion. When Kaneko tried to strike, Lucien intercepted her arm and redirected her momentum into Zenobia. They collided with a powerful impact and were rendered unconscious in a stylized, non-graphic way. Lucien taunted the others while checking his watch. The next attackers were the bishops Rosweiss and Aquino. Their magic attacks were dodged with casual ease. Lucien closed in and used gravity-enhanced blows that sent both flying into the wall, taking them out of the fight. Rosweiss unleashed an ice attack, which Lucien sidestepped lazily and mocked her afterward, provoking her into a furious barrage of spells. He managed to redirect one powerful spell toward the Rook of the Sitri peerage, who was already incapacitated from the magic. Lucien then used a gravity beam that sent Rosweiss tumbling toward Tsubaki. Tsubaki barely evaded the collision. Rosweiss struck the wall and was taken out. Aquino, having slipped up behind him, was caught by Lucien, who grabbed her and hurled her toward the downed Rosweiss. Both were knocked out from the impact. Lucien announced there were 10 seconds left on his watch. Issei and Saji combined Dragon Shot and Blaze Black Flare in a coordinated attack that briefly surprised him. Lucien recovered quickly and used gravity to contain the black flames in a perfect sphere, then opened a portal to draw in Issei's Dragon Shot and redirect it back at him. Issei was struck directly by his own attack in a sudden, dramatic reversal. Lucien said his minute was up and began to summon a magical circle to depart. Rias ordered everyone to unleash everything they had. She used her power of destruction while Tsubaki and others launched all manner of magic. Lucien countered by opening a black hole that absorbed their attacks, then vanished from the storage room with a smug remark thanking them for their contribution. At the Vassago safe house in the underworld, Azula returned to Lord Lucien and bowed, saying that Asia was still unconscious but unharmed. Lucien said they needed Asia for her abilities and instructed Azula to find Fouquet. Azula left and returned in 5 minutes, bringing Fouquet, who had been in the middle of a conversation with a devil from Hayman's group. Fouquet greeted Lord Lucien while masking her annoyance at having her conversation interrupted. Lucien asked where he was, and Fouquet replied that he was in a room. Fouquet told them she would bring them there as she started to walk to the room. Fouquet, Lucien, and Azula opened the door to a pitch-black chamber and found a small boy sitting alone on a chair. Lucien approached the boy, crouched to be at eye level, and identified him as Leonardo. Leonardo remained silent. Lucien noted that the boy was quiet and decided it did not matter because the boy did not need to speak for what Lucien had planned. Lucien stood, left the room, and thought that with all the pieces in place, the fun could begin, a terrifying smile crossing his face. Lucien finished discussing his plan to the devils gathered around him and asked if anyone had questions. No one spoke, and they all stared at him for a moment. Lucien took their silence as agreement and dismissed them while erasing the whiteboard that detailed his plans. The devils responded in unison that they would obey and scattered in many directions. One young-looking devil caught Lucien's eye as he headed for the back door. Dressed in jeans and a brown leather jacket, with black scruffy hair and a 5 o'clock shadow, the devil answered Lucien nervously when called. Lucien asked where he was going. The devil explained that he was going out to be with his family because he did not know if he would survive the coming battle and wanted to make the most of his time. Lucien told him to return soon and turned away skeptically. The devil's sweating subsided as he left the building. Lucien approached Arya, who was working on a laptop in the back room, and asked about the man. Arya looked up and identified him as Vincenzo Marini, a reincarnated devil she had revived with a pawn piece. She explained that he had been the last person reincarnated into her peerage, that he had made contracts with her peerage related to hitman work as an assassin for various crime syndicates in America, and that he had been killed by rival assassins in Brooklyn. Arya said she had revived him because she believed his connections in the human underworld would be useful. Lucien asked if Vincenzo was trustworthy. Arya replied that he had given no reason to doubt him and asked why Lucien inquired. Lucien admitted he had a bad feeling and left the room. Under the Mokali overpass, Vincenzo Marini moved cautiously, glancing over his shoulder as cars rushed overhead. He felt nervous about potential threats from above but pushed the thought aside to carry out the plan he had considered for days. He took out a gray flip phone and dialed a number, listening as a gruff devil identified himself as Detective Frierson of the Underworld Investigation Bureau. Vincenzo told Frierson that he had information about Lucien Vassago's plans while hiding behind a stone column. Frierson reacted sharply and signaled an associate to trace the call. Vincenzo laid out his demands: full immunity for his past and present crimes, $5 million, and placement in protective custody. Frierson said he would do what he could but warned it would take time and asked how Vincenzo could be contacted. Vincenzo instructed Frierson to have Lucifer meet him at the Midnight Sunfish nightclub at 8 p.m., giving the Bureau time to draft the immunity agreement. Once Vincenzo saw the agreement, he would sign it and leave with Lucifer. Vincenzo ended the call before it could be fully traced. Frierson slammed the phone down in frustration and rubbed his temples. Captain de Fariva called from his office for someone to get Surzex on the line. In the Satan's palace, Surzex sat at his desk working through paperwork his wife had given him. The other Satans were busy with their own tasks, and Asmodeus slept when a phone rang at Surzex station. Surzex answered and listened intently to the caller. After considering the information, Surzex ordered his staff to draft whatever terms Vincenzo demanded, insisting this might be their only chance. He then announced to the room that they had a lead on Lucien. The Midnight Sunfish, a shady nightclub in a rough part of town rumored to be a front for a drag ring, fell quiet when Surzex Lucifer requested a seat at the bar. The patrons obliged and watched the crimson-haired Satan. A devil in a fedora and trench coat took the seat next to him. Surzex addressed him as Marini. Vincenzo acknowledged the greeting and expressed that it was an honor to meet Lucifer. Surzex set aside formalities, presented the agreement, and told Vincenzo that once he signed it he would accompany Lucifer to the Underworld Investigation Bureau headquarters to provide all the information he had. Vincenzo scanned the agreement, signed in the required places, and Surzex rose and led the way out. Vincenzo followed Surzex and Grafia into the front hall. Grafia stood at the entrance while Surzex formed a magical circle beneath himself and Grafia. Surzex instructed Vincenzo to enter the circle once it was complete. Vincenzo nodded, stepped into the circle, and was instantly teleported to the UIB headquarters in downtown Lilith. Underworld, Interrogation Room 2B, UIB headquarters, Lilith. Seraphal Leviathan, Ajuka Beelzebub, and Grafia watched from behind a one-way mirror. They could see Vincenzo sitting in a chair and Surzex entering the interrogation room. Two magical circles materialized on the floor, the symbols of the Sitri and Gremory clans. The two peerages appeared and bowed to Lady Leviathan, Lord Beelzebub, and Grafia. Rias asked Grafia what was happening. Grafia explained to Rias that this devil had come to them and would reveal Lucien's plans in exchange for immunity. Seraphal leaned forward in excitement and shushed everyone, eager for the proceedings to begin. Surzex seated himself opposite Vincenzo, folded his hands, and demanded that Vincenzo reveal Lucien's plans. Surzex released a heavy aura of killing intent. Vincenzo began to sweat but then spoke. Vincenzo reported that Lucien had stolen military uniforms from a base and planned to use those uniforms in an attack on Heaven scheduled for the next day. Lucien intended for Heaven to believe the underworld had ordered the assault, hoping to ignite a war. Everyone in the observation room reacted in shock. Surzex maintained a composed expression despite his surprise and asked for details about the base. Vincenzo explained that the defenders of the base were now dead and that the base lay within Belphegor territory. Only those who had accompanied Lucien knew its exact location. Ajuka noted that there were only 2 military bases in Belphegor's region, so they would need to inspect both. Grafia added that they should prepare accordingly. Surzex pressed Vincenzo for the location of Sona and Asia. Vincenzo identified the kidnapped victims' captors and said they were being held in a safe house in Lilith, near a restricted area, and that only a few devils could discern its location. Seraphal erupted in fury at the mention of Lucien's name, and Ajuka restrained her before she caused havoc in the underworld. Surzex, sensing Seraphal's intent, asked again for specifics. Vincenzo admitted he had not been allowed out of the building, but he was certain the safe house was on the city's outskirts in the warehouse district and that he could recognize it if he saw it. Surzex informed him that he would accompany the strike team assigned to rescue the hostages and asked if there was any other information. Vincenzo mentioned a young boy in the warehouse. He could not see him clearly but sensed that the boy was human and carried a strange power that might be a sacred gear. Surzex acknowledged the note and opened the door to leave. With one foot out, Surzex warned Vincenzo that if his testimony proved false, their agreement would be void and Vincenzo would be tried as a traitor. Surzex then closed the door, leaving Vincenzo shaken. Returned to the group and asked for impressions. Grafia stated that she believed Vincenzo was telling the truth, saying his agreement for immunity gave him no reason to fabricate the story. Surzex asked how she could be so certain, and Grafia replied that she was adept at reading facial expressions. Surzex reacted with mild surprise at that observation. Rias asked Surzex what they should do next. Surzex turned to Ajuka, noting that Lucien was Ajuka's cousin, and asked for his assessment. Ajuka argued that Lucien would not likely send false information for psychological games and recommended they contact Heaven immediately and then assemble a team to rescue Sona and Asia. Surzex assigned roles. He ordered Rias and her peerage, along with Sona's peerage, to travel to Heaven to warn Michael about the impending attack and to remain there to assist with defense. He said he would have Asmodeus assemble a strike team to carry out the rescue operation. Regarding Vincenzo, Surzex decided to keep him under heavy guard until the mission the next day, explaining that if Vincenzo were killed, they would lose their only lead on Sona and Asia. Surzex asked Ajuka to develop a device or method to counter Lucien's gravity distortion. Ajuka agreed but warned that the technology would take time and might not be ready by tomorrow. Surzex accepted that limitation. He confirmed that everyone knew their tasks. The peerages and attendees acknowledged their orders and prepared to depart. Heaven. Throne room, Heaven City. Michael, seated on the throne, oversaw Heaven's affairs following God's death. The arrival of two magical circles on the white floor startled him and the angels in the chamber. A guard announced the appearance of devils and summoned twin spears of light, and the other guards mirrored his readiness as they approached the circles cautiously. Rias and her peerage, accompanied by Sona's peerage, stepped through the circles into the throne room. Michael ordered the guards to lower their weapons and moved from the throne to meet the visitors. The devils bowed to Michael. Michael looked around and noticed Asia was not present. He asked where she was. Rias informed him that Asia had been kidnapped. Michael's smile completely disappeared and was replaced by a frown. He asked who was responsible, and Rias replied that it was Lucien Vassago. Michael immediately grew worried and asked what Lucien could possibly want with Asia. Rias explained that they did not know, but that their purpose there was to warn Heaven of an attack planned for the following day, and the announcement caused many angels to gasp in shock. Gabriel asked how they had learned of the plan. Rias answered that a devil from Lucien's group had turned on him and provided information in exchange for immunity. Michael asked when the attack would occur, and Rias said it would be sometime the next day. Michael instructed Gabriel to alert Uriel and Raphael and to put all forces on standby. Gabriel acknowledged the order and ran off. Rias added that their older brother had ordered them to stay and assist in warding off Lucien's assault, and both peerages bowed to Heaven's leader. Michael acknowledged the support and said they would need all the help they could get. Underworld Vassago Safe House. Sona Sitri and Asia Argento were chained together in the back room of the safe house, while two guards stood outside their door under strict instructions not to leave the area. Lucien arrived and ordered the guards to step aside. They unlocked the door and allowed him to enter. He entered with a gentle, smug smile. Sona reacted with obvious contempt. Lucien taunted that Sona was speaking to the future ruler of the underworld and suggested a punishment for her insolence, speaking close to her with a mocking laugh. Sona stated seriously that others would stop him, but Lucien dismissed the idea, saying they would not even know what hit them. Asia called out that Issei would save her, but Lucien replied condescendingly that would not happen. Sona asked whether this was the moment to ask about his master plan, and Lucien responded eagerly that he would explain since there was nothing they could do about it. He revealed that the Phoenix Battalion would commit an act of war the next day. When Asia asked what the Phoenix Battalion was, Sona began to answer, but Lucien abruptly cut her off with a sharp slap across her cheek and ordered her not to interrupt. Sona recoiled, clutching her face. Lucien continued, saying that the Phoenix forces would attack heaven and start a war. Sona objected that such treason would be unthinkable, but Lucien indicated otherwise and produced 2 devils in Phoenix Battalion uniforms to reinforce his claim. Asia accused him of planning to attack heaven and frame them, asking what his goal was. Lucien smugly confirmed her accusation and then outlined his plan. The attack would ignite a war between heaven and the underworld, the 2 sides would be forced into a stalemate, and he would use the chaos to seize the government. He argued that war would rally the devils behind a single leader, and he intended to move against the fallen angels, defeat them, and emerge as their leader. Sona called him insane, and Lucien replied that, perhaps, but that he knew what needed to be done. Asia protested that he would never defeat God, and Lucien coldly told her that God was dead, accusing her of clinging to hope. Asia began to cry. Lucien left them and locked the door behind him. He settled on a couch to wait for the final piece of his plan. He dozed off and was awakened when his queen, Azula, appeared with the item he needed, a vial containing a strange black liquid. He opened his eyes to see her standing there and accepted the vial, praising her success with a smile. Azula looked pleased and slightly flushed at the compliment. Lucien acknowledged her contribution with a warm nod and told her to prepare for the mission. He returned to inspect the troops and their equipment. Devils hurried to make last-minute preparations for the assault on heaven, and one reported that all weapons had been equipped with devil magic-infused ammunition. Lucien approved the work and addressed the assembled devils, declaring that history would remember what they were about to do and urging them to seize their place in it. The crowd cheered, and Lucien ordered all members of the strike team to gear up and return in 15 minutes. Azula praised Lucien's speech and he returned the compliment, then told her to get ready. He walked back to the room where Sona and Asia were held and announced that today was the day. Sona declared that he would not get away with his plans, and Lucien only smiled and left. He checked the equipment once more while already in his Phoenix Battalion uniform, fully ready for the assault. 15 minutes passed quickly, and before he knew it, Lucien found himself surrounded by his entire strike team. The team consisted of Azula, Camula, Kuru, Chun-Li, Jill, and several devils from Heyman and Aria's group. 11 devils in total, Lucien included, carried MP7s loaded with devil bullets designed to be especially effective against angels. Lucien told his stoic group that he hoped they would be remembered in the long scroll of history before they left. He drew a deep breath, then signaled they move. A giant Vassago magic circle appeared beneath them and teleported them all to the outskirts of heaven. He ordered silence until engagement and instructed everyone to switch to telepathic communication as they approached the first wall. Peering out from behind a trash can, he spotted 2 patrolling guards. Using his light-manipulating glove, Lucien formed 2 arrows that struck the guards and neutralized them. He crept along the wall to the gates of heaven, ensured the area was clear, and then led the group over the gates. They moved into Heaven City, slipping through alleyways kept immaculate by angelic magic. Heaven City was unlike any other. Everything gleamed in white, yellow, or pink, dark colors, and modern vehicles were absent, and only footpaths led through the immaculate streets. The city was divided into 4 spheres that housed distinct classes of angels. The first sphere was home to the Ophanim, angels with 2 or 4 wings. The second sphere sheltered the cherubim, angels with 6 or 8 wings. The third sphere contained high-ranking seraph, and the fourth sphere was reserved for the 4 great seraph Michael, Gabriel, Uriel, and Raphael, and the throne room where the throne of God resided. Lucien and his team were in the first sphere and rapidly approached the wall that separated it from the second sphere. Azula addressed Lucien telepathically with concern. He responded by peering around cautiously. Azula warned that the silence felt wrong and that they might be walking into a trap. Lucien agreed and said he had expected heavier angelic forces. He decided they needed to take out additional angels before retreating and broke telepathic communication to signal the decision was final. They moved to the wall and spotted 5 guards patrolling from the left. Jill and Chun-Li brought out silenced MP7s and fired. The angels struck and collapsed. Lucien seized an opening and slipped through to the second sphere. The second sphere was grander, with massive white skyscrapers piercing the clouds. Lucien moved through it, searching for angels to disable. Meanwhile, in the underworld in the warehouse district of Lilith, Vincenzo moved with a forward team of nearly 10 devils guided by Yaris operatives. They advanced along the warehouse walls until Vincenzo pointed out a warehouse with a broken lamppost as the suspected safe house. The team leader asked how Vincenzo could be sure. Vincenzo indicated the lamppost as the distinguishing mark. The leader reported their find to HQ and ordered the team to move in for confirmation. They crept to the safe house's west wall and positioned themselves beside a window. The leader asked Mason to use his powers to see through the wall. Mason concentrated and observed numerous devils inside and many illegal firearms laid out on tables. He reported no line of sight on any hostages but confirmed the presence of weapons. The leader relayed the information to HQ, which reminded them that finding hostages was the primary objective and securing weapons was secondary. HQ ordered them to hold position and not engage until the signal from Heaven. P-Team and F-Team were en route. Back in Heaven, in the third sphere, a female angel informed Michael that Lucien had entered the third sphere. Michael acknowledged the report and considered whether Lucien would take the bait they had set. Issei asked if Lucien would fall for it. Michael admitted he disliked using his brother as bait but agreed they needed something to draw Lucien out. Rias suggested that an open door to one of the houses in Heaven would not look suspicious and would likely tempt Lucien. An explosion in a house across the street confirmed the trap had been sprung. Michael announced that Lucien had taken the bait and ordered all forces to attack. Hidden angelic forces leapt from their positions. Across the street, the strike team encountered Archangel Raphael, who had caught them by surprise and inflicted losses. After a fierce clash in which Raphael was neutralized, Lucien ordered a retreat. Only Lucien, Azula, Chun-Li, Kurumu, Camula, and Jill remained and ran toward the wall of the third sphere with pursuers closing in. Lucien cursed inwardly, realizing the operation had been easier than it should have been and that a trap had been set. Azula warned him of incoming threats to his left. He dodged the incoming light spears and used a sudden gravity distortion to incapacitate the 4 angels, throwing them off balance and out of commission. There was no time to play around. Lucien warned Azula that an attack was coming on her right as the group reached the third wall. Azula cartwheeled out of the path of 2 light spears and countered with a burst of lightning that incapacitated the 2 angels who had launched them. Meanwhile, in the underworld, headquarters cleared all teams for action. Alpha Team detonated an explosive on the west wall and caught the hostile forces inside by surprise. F-Team breached through the front entrance while P-Team dropped from the ceiling and landed behind most of the adversaries. The hostiles were soon surrounded on 3 sides, trapped between 20 devils and 10 fallen angels after Azazel sent F-Team to assist. The teams closed ranks and pursued the survivors who fled deeper into the warehouse. Many of the attackers were neutralized, but a number of survivors retreated into a deeper corridor ahead of the room where Sona and Asia were hiding. In the chaos, Heyman found his sacred gear user and rushed to him as the remaining hostiles funneled toward the hallway leading to the hostage room. Heyman urgently instructed Shale to deploy Telos Karma while shaking his pawn's shoulder. Shale acknowledged and produced the sacred gear, a ring on the middle finger of his right hand. When the assault group came into view, the ring flashed bright green and shadows formed beneath them. Figures then rose from the floor and rushed the team, forcing the group to fall back. The summoned beings pursued them into the main warehouse while the surviving hostiles followed closely behind. The Telos Karma functioned much like the Annihilation Maker. It accessed the memories of those before it and, from those recollections, manifested beings resembling those who had harmed or killed the remembered figures, creatures filled with a fierce desire for revenge. In effect, this Longinus-class sacred gear could create an army of vengeful apparitions driven to settle old debts. Those apparitions chased the group into the warehouse's open center and held the line at the hallway leading to the hostages. Saget telepathically informed Lucien that they had a problem as he shoved a Phoenix battalion member aside. Lucien mentally replied that he was occupied elsewhere, having just pierced 2 angels with light spears in heaven. Sagat then reported that the safe house was under attack, dodging a fire blast and using a fallen angel as a makeshift shield to protect nearby teammates. Lucien telepathically ordered Sagat to hold the line until he returned and to prevent the attackers from reaching the boy and the hostages. Lucien then seized an approaching angel and delivered a decisive, non-graphic strike that rendered the angel incapacitated. Sagat acknowledged the command and hurled the fallen angel toward an enemy devil to buy them more time. Back in heaven, Azula asked how much longer it would be before they could safely teleport as she unleashed a bolt of lightning at an angel to her left. Lucien's group used their wings and flew steadily toward the second sphere. Lucien explained that they had to get past the gate where angelic magic weakened enough to permit safe movement. As they approached the second wall, he noticed formations of angelic archers preparing to rain down arrows. The angel commander ordered his archers to fire, and a massive volley darkened the sky. Lucien instructed everyone to fall in behind him. He extended his right hand and opened a black hole that absorbed the entire barrage. Opening a second portal on the far side of the wall, he released the arrows so that they struck the archers' flank, incapacitating many of them. Without pausing to look back at the fallen defenders, Lucien and his group flew over the second wall. Jill alerted Lucien to a charging angel at 11 o'clock low. Lucien performed a barrel roll to avoid the strike, and Azula immediately struck the attacker with a concentrated bolt that dispersed it. The group pressed on toward the first sphere wall and then the gates of heaven, dodging Issei's dragon shot, Aquino's lightning, Rias's destructive energy volleys, Rosweiss's rune magic, and the angel's light arrows and spears. As the onslaught intensified, Lucien grew impatient with the barrage. Close to the wall, he used gravity manipulation to lift the opposing defenders from their positions and rapidly accelerate them down to the ground, knocking most of them unconscious and clearing their path. He allowed himself a grim moment of satisfaction as they crossed the first sphere. Near the gates of heaven, the group retracted their wings and ran toward the predetermined rendezvous. A 12-winged angel crept up and unleashed a stream of fire at Lucien. Kurumu threw herself between the blast and Lucien to shield him, taking the full impact. Lucien immediately turned and cradled her as she faded from consciousness. Kurumu, whispering in her last moments that Lucien had once saved her and that she only wanted to repay that debt, slipped away in his arms. Lucien gently laid her body on the ground and turned to face the 12-winged angel, whose expression remained cold and unreadable. Lucien ordered his peerage to go aid the others at the warehouse, promising that he would deal with this angel and rejoin them as soon as he could. Azula began to protest, but Lucien stopped her with a sharp command, and the peerage entered the magical circle that would transport them to Lilith's location. The angel who had attacked them presented as a young man with messy brown hair and observed Lucien with a steady, unreadable gaze. Lucien confronted the figure as Archangel Uriel by name and charged forward with all the fury of a commander avenging a fallen comrade, intent on making the Archangel pay for what had been done. Uriel was stunned by Lucien's speed and ferocity and could only dodge while trying to summon his famous holy flames. Lucien created dozens of spears of light and hurled them at Uriel, who struggled to evade and counter them. Lucien managed to strike Uriel in the side. Uriel collapsed, coughing and reeling, unaware of Lucien approaching from behind. Lucien used gravity to immobilize Uriel's 12 wings and then disabled them one by one, leaving the seraph unable to fly and crying out in pain. Lucien then released a concentrated gravity assault that finished Uriel, leaving him lifeless. Lucien knelt beside Kurumu's body and closed her eyes. He kissed her forehead, shed a single tear, and told himself that she had served him well. He then opened a magic circle and teleported away. Lucien arrived in a corridor where the battle lines had been drawn. Terrorists were desperately defending a hallway entrance while the fallen angel and devil group pushed forward, forcing the terrorists back. Azula rushed to Lucien and told him to take her to the boy and that they needed to evacuate soon. Lucien nodded and moved into the hallway. Meanwhile, Issei faced a terrorist and activated Dragon Shot. Rias's and Sona's peerages were teleported to the safe house and thrown directly into the fray. Kaneko alerted Issei to an enemy approaching from behind, and a familiar flaming fist struck the devil who had been sneaking up on him. Riser had arrived with his peerage. Issei turned in surprise and asked why Riser was there. Riser vowed to anyone who harmed Ravel would be punished and declared that Lucien would pay for making Ravel cry. Rias ordered them to focus and rejoin the battle, then launched her destructive power at a charging terrorist. Riser rushed to engage another attacker. The UETRS commander reported that the enemy was retreating. Issei ordered pursuit and sprinted down a dark hallway with the others close behind. At the end of the hall they rushed through a door into a larger room and saw a gaping breach in one wall. About 40 meters away, Lucien stood with Sona, Asia, and Leonardo. Issei charged up after receiving a power boost from Rias and fired dragon shot at Lucien, whose back was turned. Camula threw herself in the way and took the full force of the blast to protect Lucien. She fell, fatally wounded. Seeing this, Lucien snapped and went completely unhinged. Lucien crushed a vial in his hand and then charged at Issei with terrifying speed, striking him with a brutal, incapacitating blow that left Issei pinned and drained of much of his power. Issei weakly wondered why his strength was ebbing. Lucien told him that it was the curse of Samel and savored the pain he had inflicted. He then manipulated gravity behind Issei to open a massive portal. With a final shove, Lucien kicked Issei into the one-way dimensional gap before it snapped shut. Rias and the others ran toward Lucien, but he only laughed and grabbed Leonardo. He forced a magical circle into Leonardo's body, activating something beyond normal defenses. Leonardo cried out as shadows rose from the ground and began to take shape. Lucien revealed that he had forcibly triggered Leonardo's balance breaker and that the underworld would welcome the creatures he was creating. 13. Enormous monsters formed before them. Lucien created another magical circle beneath the creatures and left them to wreak havoc. Rias, Sona, and Riser urged their peerages to stop the monsters. Their strongest attacks struck the new foes, but the creatures shrugged off the assaults. Lucien taunted them that their deaths were approaching and gave the order that his peerage should return 2 hostages. He directed them to meet at Safe House 2B. Then he vanished, and his forces retreated. Amid the chaos, his group fled but the others managed to recover the 2 hostages. Rias and her peerage rushed to Asia and embraced her. Saji and their others did the same, relief flooding them as they told Asia and each other how much they had missed them. The reunion was cut short by the arrival of the 4 Satans and the fallen angel leaders. Seraphal flew in and tackled Sona in a joyful, if abrupt, embrace. Falbium urged everyone to remain serious, and Surzex explained grimly that an urgent matter required their attention. Rias asked her brother what had happened. Surzex reported that 13 giant monsters had been seen at the extreme ends of the underworld. Azazel clarified that 6 of the monsters were in their territory and 7 were in the other. Surzex then asked about Issei. Someone informed him that Issei was in the dimensional gap. Rias explained sadly that Lucien had poisoned him with Samel's blood and shoved him into the gap. Surzex reacted with sorrow. Azazel stated seriously that Issei's death was tragic, but they had to figure out how to stop the monsters before they rampaged through the underworld. Surzex insisted they all return to Gremory Castle to make plans. Everyone nodded and activated their magic circles to transport to Gremory Castle. Ajuka muttered to himself as he stared at the underworld sky and prepared a magic circle to travel to Gremory Castle. Flashback 2 years earlier at Yokai Academy. Kurumu begged as a pink-haired vampire approached, leaning against a tree and visibly injured from the fight. A new voice ordered the vampire to let her go, surprising everyone. Mocha demanded to know who spoke, and Lucien stepped from the shadows. Mocha snarled at him, and Lucien declared that he had come for the succubus. Kurumu looked at him with relief. Mocha challenged him, and Lucien warned that refusal would cause problems as he released part of his aura. Mocha charged. Lucien evaded her kick and coldly told her to know her place. He manipulated gravity to negate another strike and then struck with accelerated force, knocking Mocha down harder than she had ever been hit before. For the first time, inner Mocha felt fear. Mocha asked trembling what he was. Lucien stated that he was a devil and delivered a blow that rendered her unconscious. Turning to the human who had watched in fear, Lucien assured him that he would not be killed and that he was there only for what he needed. He offered his hand to Kurumu, carried her to safety, unfurled his wings, and departed into the red sky after telling the human to have luck. Present human world, Washington, D.C., United States. Lucien Vassago sat alone in the living room of his safe house, having shed a tear as he recalled the first time he had met his knight, who had been killed in Lilith. He listed with anger the names of his fallen peerage Saito, Sagat, Zangief, Kurumu, Kamula, Fuken, noting that most had died in the battle at the safe house and the survivors bore injuries. He sighed that he needed rest and went upstairs to the large bedroom. Azula, Cammy, Jill and Chun-Li lay on the bed, exhausted but alive with only minor wounds. Lucien joined them and quickly fell asleep. 3 hours later, Azula shook him awake and urged him to come downstairs to see something. He asked what had happened and went down to find everyone waiting. He reacted in shock upon seeing Issei's face on the television. The underworld broadcast caption read, "A pay dragon destroys monsters." In a burst of anguish, Lucien smashed the TV and began to hyperventilate, struggling to accept that Issei might still be alive. His remaining peerage calmed him, and a cold, determined smile crept across his face as he told them he had an idea. Human world, Highschool residence, Japan. Issei's mother was preparing dinner when a stranger knocked on the door. The young man introduced himself as Lucien Vassago and said he had business with her son, wearing a dangerous smile. 5 hours later, Issei returned home with the Occult Research Club. Sirzex Lucifer and his wife Graphia arrived at the end of the group. Issei called out for his mother. Rias handed Issei a note found on the table. It said that his parents were on vacation and requested that he call a provided number. Issei asked if his parents had told anyone about leaving, and Rias remarked that it was strange since they usually would have mentioned it. Kiba suggested calling the number, and Issei dialed. His mother answered and asked to be put on speaker to speak with everyone. Rias and Asia greeted her in unison while the others offered their own salutations. Issei inquired where she and his father were, and his mother revealed they were in a small place called Lilith, which stunned the group because Lilith was the capital of the underworld. Issei asked her to repeat herself, and his mother obliged, addressing him warmly as her dear Issei. His mother's voice announced that they were in Lilith, but the tone slowly shifted into Lucien Vassago's. Everyone shouted Lucien's name in unison. Issei demanded to know what had been done to his father and mother over the phone. Lucien taunted that since Issei had taken something from him, it was only fitting that he do the same. Rias urgently demanded that he not harm Issei's parents. Lucien reassured them in a cold voice that they would be safe as long as Issei accepted his challenge. Issei asked what Lucien was planning. Lucien replied that it would be one final showdown. Since Issei had taken Kurumu's life, Lucien would take Issei's. He threatened to harm Issei's parents if Issei did not show up. Issei reluctantly asked when and where. Lucien instructed him to keep his phone on and to be in Lilith the next day. Lucien added that Issei could bring his peerage members, but warned that any other arrivals would put Issei's parents at risk. Lucien ended the call and returned the voice to Issei's mothers. At an unknown location on the outskirts of Lilith, Lucien spoke to the bound and gagged figures of Issei's parents. They struggled against the restraints but could not speak. Lucien told them not to worry, that it would all be over the next day, and looked toward Lilith with a smirk. Later, Issei received a small vial from Ajuka Beelzebub at the Satan's palace. Ajuka explained that he had created a strange black liquid that would temporarily suppress Lucien's powers if Lucien made skin contact with it. The liquid would cause intense burning sensations and strip Lucien of his abilities for a time. Issei accepted the vial with gratitude. President Rias thanked Ajuka, the entire peerage bowed, and they teleported to downtown Lilith. Issei's phone rang. He picked it up while scanning the area for anyone from Lucien's team watching them. Lucien's voice on the line mocked Issei for showing up and then instructed them to go west for 10 blocks and wait for further instructions, before hanging up. The peerage followed the directions and stopped at the corner where Lucien called again 5 minutes later. Lucien ordered them to fly 20 miles north to take them out of town. Issei opened his wings and flew with the rest of the peerage. Rias scanned the industrial area for possible locations, noting one unfinished structure amid the factories. When Issei landed after a fast flight, Lucien's call came again. Lucien taunted the group about his game, then told them to go west for 5 minutes and that they would know the building when they saw it. The group walked west and came upon a massive, unfinished skyscraper of more than 30 floors. President Rias identified it as the Hall of the Fallen Pillars, a dark, abandoned monument with a floor for each pillar destroyed in the Great War. The entrance was unfinished and shadowed. Inside, Issei spotted his father in a corner. Issei ran to him. His father was bound and gagged and showed visible signs of having been harmed. He was bruised and battered. Issei helped him to his feet and his father asked weakly if it was really Issei. Issei confirmed that it was him. Issei asked Rias what to do. Rias ordered that his father needed medical attention and instructed Kaneko and Asia to escort him to Sitri Hospital. Kaneko lifted Issei's father and the two of them stepped into the magical transport circle and left. A new voice cheerfully interrupted from the darkness. The team recognized the sound and pointed out a walkie-talkie lying on the ground. The voice belonged to Lucien. Issei shouted into the device, asking where Lucien was. Lucien replied that Issei would find him soon enough and that he would be waiting on the 3rd floor. The group moved to the stairwell and climbed to the 3rd floor. Lucien stood smiling in the center of the dark room. He greeted Issei with a mocking, familiar taunt and insulted him. Issei demanded to know where his mother was. Lucien replied that she was on the 17th floor and that Issei would have to get past him to reach her. Lucien unleashed a gravity attack that slammed Issei to the ground. Rias shouted encouragement from the stairwell. Issei pushed himself back up and Lucien loomed over him, grabbing him roughly by the throat and lifting him to eye level. Issei struggled in Lucien's grip. Lucien smirked and moved his hand toward the side of his head, which gave Issei the opening he needed. Issei threw the vial Ajuka had given him. The vial shattered on Lucien's face and the black liquid made contact with his skin. Lucien released his hold immediately, stumbling back while wincing and shouting from the sudden, burning sensation. Rias announced that Ajuka had created the substance to strip Lucien of his powers. Lucien tried to fire gravity, flame, and water attacks, but none of his abilities responded. With Lucien temporarily powerless, Issei stood up and declared that Lucien was defenseless. Lucien insisted he was not, and at that moment 4 members of Lucien's peerage dropped down from the ceiling and joined him. Lucien ordered them to attack as he dashed toward the stairs to escape. The 2 peerages collided. Azula confronted Aquino, Rosweiss, and Rias. Cammy engaged Kiba and Zenobia, and 2 pawns leapt to engage Gasper. The battle flared into a fast, intense exchange of blows and supernatural techniques as both sides fought in a dramatic, high-energy confrontation. Issei ran after Lucien. Lucien shouted that Issei should die as he hurled a light spear at him while Issei came up the stairs to the 5th floor. Issei cried out and looked down at his left leg where the spear had struck, but he pressed on, determined to reach Lucien. Lucien sprinted up the next flight of stairs with Issei close behind, the Vassago air launching dragon shots as he retreated. Meanwhile, the situation with Rias and the others had turned critical. Azula was overwhelming them with brilliant fire techniques and magical power, and a strike from her knocked Rosweiss unconscious. Cammy held her own against Zenobia and Kiba, managing to land a hit on Kiba despite his speed. Jill succeeded in incapacitating Gasper, and Chun-Li was about to deliver a decisive strike before reinforcements arrived. Sona returned with her entire peerage and fired a high-pressure stream of water at Chun-Li, preventing her from finishing Gasper. Tsubaki Shinra materialized a mirror to block Azula's incoming fire. The mirror shattered and reflected the attack back, incapacitating Azula. With support from Sona's peerage, the 3 remaining members of Lucien's peerage were driven back and ultimately defeated by the combined teams. After they subdued Cammy, Saji asked where Issei was. Rias replied that he was chasing Lucien inside the building and urged everyone to help. The combined peerage raced up the stairs, reached the top floor, and pushed open the roof entrance to find Issei, Lucien and Issei's mother. Lucien ordered them to stay back as he held Issei's mother in front of him as a human shield, pressing a light spear against her throat and threatening to kill her. Sona declared that this had gone far enough. Lucien snapped at her to be quiet and dragged Mrs. Hayadu closer to the edge. Mrs. Hayadu choked back tears and pleaded that she did not want to die. Rias signaled for everyone to lower their weapons, and the rest of her peerage followed. Sona's peerage did the same. Issei was the last to lower his gauntlet, and Lucien smiled at the momentary opening. He threw Issei's mother aside and then hurled the light spear at Issei. Issei rolled out of the way, and now they had a clear shot at Lucien. Rias and Sona shouted together as they launched their attacks. Rias unleashed her power of destruction while Sona fired another stream of water. Issei rolled and fired a dragon shot. The combined strike struck Lucien, and he cried out as they sent him tumbling off the roof. He fell 30 stories and landed on the ground far below, and he did not move. Sona said that it was all over as she looked down at Lucien's motionless body. Rias approached the crying Mrs. Hayadu and embraced her. She then looked up at the purple underworld sky, knowing that it was finally over.